Chapter 284. Satan laughed again. Faust, do you want to have everything in desire? Fine. I am willing to help you. Go back to the temple, there are 2 emissaries waiting for you at the door. They will help you and Samir assassinate Cyrus. As for whether you can succeed, it depends on your strength and wisdom. What Faust did not know was that just after he left the palace, Samir closed her eyes and shouted in her soul. Zhongli shouted, God Amon, why did you make me ask such a question as Faust? Amon's voice sounded in her soul. Isn't that what you want to ask, right? Although he didn't make a choice, you got the answer you wanted. He will go with you to assassinate Cyrus. Samir, God Amon, do you think I will succeed? Amon, I don't know if you can succeed, but your idea is not unreasonable. The kingdom of Boz was originally established by the union of 6 farming tribes and 4 nomadic tribes, and Cyrus was the leader of the strongest of them, the Amens. Under his leadership, the kingdom rose very quickly, as you have seen. But such rapid expansion, opening up such a large territory in a short period of time, the complex ethnic composition of the kingdom, and the uneven development of the various regions, this is an unprecedented challenge to the governance of the kingdom of Boz. If Cyrus dies, the tribes will fight for power, and without a strong ruler like him, the provinces may fall apart. It seems that assassinating Cyrus is a way to save the fate of Assur. If there is internal strife in Boz, Assur will have a chance to breathe, and the newly occupied provinces may also take the opportunity to restore the country. But even so, the Assyrians also need to know how to run their own country, otherwise even if there are no strong enemies, it will be difficult to avoid decline. After saying this, Amon's voice disappeared. Samir opened his eyes, and a man walked into the inner hall. It was none other than the disciple of the Garden of Eden, Rulio, who was born as a mermaid. Rulio asked, Your Majesty, are you ready? We will set off this afternoon. Samir turned and said, I am very happy that Ammonius sent you to help me. Although I am not a mermaid, my people have a deep relationship with the ancient king of the mermaids. The power I received also came from him. Seeing you, I know that the mermaids are not extinct. You helped Goliath assassinate Sinek, and I did not expect you to help me assassinate Cyrus today. Rulio replied, It is precisely because of this that God Amon sent me here. But I will not help you assassinate Cyrus, I will only help you escape after the assassination. Ammonius does not want you to die. He once said that assassinating Sinek was not the only way to solve Assur's problems. You are a more suitable monarch than Sinek. Unfortunately, no one could have expected the situation to change. Samuel smiled a little miserably. Escape? Even if the assassination succeeds, I may not come back alive. But I hope that Faust can live. He is more useful to this country than I am. If you really have a way to save someone, then please save him. This is my prayer to the gods. Rulio, another messenger has already gone to help Faust, otherwise your assassination plan will not succeed. As for me, I will follow by your side. Faust returned to the main shrine of the empire, and there were indeed 2 people waiting for him in front of the door. A powerful aura suddenly emerged, as if emerging directly from the darkness. The guards were startled and hurried forward to reprimand them. Faust said from the carriage, Do not be rude. These 2 are my honored guests, quickly invite them over. One of them was the king of killers of the Anunnaki divine clan, Bright Moon Knight. This divine emissary not only mastered the power of violence, but was also a master of concealment, assassination, ambush, tracking, and escape. The other was the divine emissary under the god of wisdom, Dums, the younger brother of Peloponnes, the goddess of spring and life. Dums had once set up an ambush with Bright Moon Knight against Ammon, but Ammon did not kill him. He only captured him and sent him to the underworld in exchange for Peloponnes, and made an agreement with Peloponnes that the siblings would take turns to serve in the underworld. Later, Ammon led the army to attack the underworld, and Dums also participated in that operation, and Peloponnes just happened to pass the test and become a god who transcended eternal life. Now that the Anunnaki divine clan had lost its divine realm in the mortal world, the gods had understood the decision of Anu, and in the future, Amun would replace the position of god of creation. The god of wisdom was also wise to order all the divine emissaries in the mortal world to obey Amun's orders. This time, Amun sent Bright Moon Night to assist Faust, and Dums volunteered to help. On the one hand, he had a good personal relationship with Bright Moon Night, and on the other hand, he also needed to do something at this time. The green bamboo snake staff in Dum's hand was a divine artifact left behind by Tiamat, and his strength was not weak. Except for the fallen god of Gale, Dum's speed was the fastest among the divine emissaries of Anunnaki. So his task this time was mainly to attract the pursuers and cover the others to escape. Samir's original plan was to assassinate Cyrus in the city of Nippur, because the king of Pots was going to hold a grand ceremony in this city to celebrate the establishment of the kingdom's new province. On occasions of major ceremonies, the people would watch the ceremony in the square, and it would be relatively easy to sneak in. Cyrus would definitely appear in public, and this was a good opportunity to assassinate him. But Bright Moon Night made a new plan, which was riskier than Samir's original plan, and more likely to succeed. He suggested that Faust give this plan to Samir for discussion. As it was a last-minute decision, Faust only hurriedly handed over the daily affairs of the shrine and packed his belongings. The sky was already bright, and he needed to go to the palace again to participate in the court meeting. In front of the ministers, Empress Samir unexpectedly changed the decision she made last night. She would go with Lord Faust to inspect the border, and Seneca's son would still be the governor, and the Minister of the Interior, Lohuard, would assist her. In the afternoon, the Empress set off. Although the order to leave the capital was only issued last night, Samir was clearly well prepared, and everything seemed to be in order. Lohuard led the ministers to send the Empress carriage out of the city, and Faust also followed the royal guards to the southern border. That night, when they were resting in the palace, Empress Samir summoned Faust again. When Faust saw the Empress, he found that there was a guard armed with a sword standing beside Her Majesty. It was Rulio, who had participated in the assassination of Sinek. Samir told Faust about her assassination plan. First, they would inspect the border garrison according to the plan, and everything would proceed as normal, without letting the outside world notice anything unusual. Samir had already sent people to closely monitor Cyrus's movements. When Cyrus was about to arrive at the city of Nippur, Samir also left one city to inspect another city. She quietly left halfway, disguised herself, and sneaked into the province of the Kingdom of Potsdam. Regardless of whether the assassination was successful or not, she and Faust could not reveal their identities. If they were besieged by the enemy and unable to escape, they could not even leave behind their own corpses. If the assassination was successful, it would certainly cause internal strife in the various tribes of Potsdam, but if the identity of the murderer was revealed, it would probably immediately lead to a large-scale retaliation from the Kingdom of Potsdam. Things would backfire, and the Assur Empire would not have a chance to breathe. Faust took the opportunity to hand over Bright Moon Night's assassination plan to Samir. Bright Moon Night and Dums did not follow the Empress's carriage. They had already rushed to the city of Nippur in advance to make arrangements. Bright Moon Night was an oracle who was best at setting traps. Even Amun had almost fallen into an ingenious trap he had set back then. Enril was eventually killed by Marduk because of that trap, and now they had to deal with a king on earth. When Samir saw the plan, she decided to follow it. Her Majesty the Empress came in person, and the sage imperial advisor also followed beside her. The morale of the various armies stationed at the border was naturally greatly boosted, and there was a rare sign of renewed enthusiasm after the defeat. The Empress appeased the soldiers, and Faust organized the affairs of the grassland administration. No one could see any unusual movements from them. The spies sent by Samir had been paying attention to Cyrus's journey and would send back secret reports at any time. About 10 days later, Cyrus was finally about to arrive at the city of Nippur, and Samir also left the city that she had just inspected and went to another city. When the Empress went out, she had a large guard of honor, so it was impossible for her to travel on a light horse. Therefore, her speed was not fast, and it would take 7 or 8 days to reach the next destination, and this period of time was enough to sneak into the territory of Potts and carry out the assassination. On the night of their departure, Faust, Samir, and Rulio left quietly. Before they left, they gave strict orders that their trusted subordinates were to wear the clothes of the Empress and the High Priest, sit in the carriage during the day, and stay in the tent at night, but they did not see anyone. Faust and the others sneaked into the territory of Potts, as if they had silently disappeared from the world. One morning 3 days later, in the territory of the city of Kish in the Lisbon province of the Kingdom of Potts, smoke and dust covered the sky from the distant official road. In a majestic manner, the army in bright armor crossed the Euphrates River and was marching in the direction of the city of Kish. At the forefront of the procession was a group of personal guards, surrounding the Supreme General of Potts, Darius. One could roughly tell the level of training of an army by looking at its march. This army of about 1,000 people, 300 cavalry and 700 infantrymen, marched in 4 rows. The long procession on the official road was neat and tidy, without the slightest hint of disorder. These were the elites of the 10,000 immortals, under Darius' command. They were here to be inspected by Cyrus the Great, and at the same time, to escort Cyrus to the border of the Empire of Igut. Of course, the upheaval of the nations of the continent was not limited to Assyria. After Darius defeated Goliath and destroyed Hittite, Cyrus immediately sent his officials to divide Hittite into 3 parts, establishing 3 new provinces. Darius incorporated the navy of Hittite and moved south along the coastline, approaching the Cape States of the Empire of Igut. The main naval force of Hittite originally belonged to the army of Nannar. Almost all of its warships were intact during the war, because the decisive battle was fought on land, the naval warships could not go ashore. After Hittite surrendered and was annexed, the original naval force was incorporated by Darius and became the army that continued to attack the Empire of Igut. However, the navy of the original army of Nannar was not the main force of the attack, but more of the role of transporting supplies and covering the flanks. The main force commanded by Darius was personally formed and trained by him, the 10,000 immortals. This army had 10,000 soldiers, which was twice the size of the regular army of the continent. According to folklore, their warriors were unkillable. Of course, the legend could not be true. In fact, this was the elite of the elites in Potts' army. Whenever someone died in battle, the missing member would be immediately replaced. They always maintained a complete organizational structure, received unified battle formation training, and became stronger and stronger in battle, almost invincible. With the prestige of annexing Hittite, Darius incorporated the navy of Hittite and led the 10,000 immortals to approach the Empire of Igut. He sent messengers to ask the Empire of Igut to surrender, so as to avoid the disaster of war. The Empire of Igut was greatly shaken, and the nobles in the country were divided into pro-war and pro-peace factions. The pro-war faction hoped to rely on the Kenmet defense line at the border to repel Darius's army, just like how they stopped the invasion of the Uruk Legion. The pro-peace faction believed that the Empire of Igut was no match for Potts' army, and pointless resistance would only lead to greater losses. They suggested to surrender to avoid the fate of annihilation. The pro-peace faction in the Empire of Igut actually had their own selfish motives. If there was really a decisive battle, it would no longer be the era when Ammon led the army to fight against the Uruk Legion. The Empire of Igut had lost the vassal state of Hittite in the last war, and its national strength was already weak. Later, the new pharaoh Merneptah implemented monotheism to sheep, and the various factions in the country underwent a new round of reshuffling. Although the internal situation had stabilized, there was also a huge amount of internal friction in the process, and the recovery of the national strength did not show much improvement. Merneptah built a new capital in the southern part of the empire, and a large number of people were recruited. At present, this magnificent new capital had begun to take shape, but in Merneptah's plan, the construction blueprint was only halfway completed. Such a large-scale construction of the new capital was also a waste of money and manpower. The financial burden of the empire was huge, and the taxes of the city-states had also become heavier. In short, the empire of Igut was no longer as glorious as it was in the past, and it was difficult to resist the Potts army. Moreover, There was no genius commander like Supreme General Amon in the country. Even if Supreme General Amon was still there, what could he do? With Goliath's ability, he could defeat the Igut army back then, and Hittites' national strength did not decline, but didn't it still lose to Pots? Goliath died for his country, and the king of Hittite, Ashur, surrendered. And according to the policy of Cyrus, after the establishment of the new province, the original nobles would not lose their privileged status, and would still become the local rulers representing the new king, so why would they risk their lives to resist? Therefore, the pro-peace faction became the mainstream in the court of Igut, but the ministers could surrender, but Pharaoh Merneptah could not take the initiative to surrender. Ashur, the king of Hittite, had no choice but to surrender, because the last resistance had been defeated. Although he was still alive, how could his status be compared to that of the king? He was nothing more than an ordinary lord, and he would also be under the close surveillance of the Pots kingdom, and there was no telling if one day he would find an excuse to get rid of him. Merneptah could not lose his empire, but he did not have the heart to defeat the Pots army, fearing that he would suffer the same fate as Ashur, so he had to rely on the pro-war faction. This pharaoh prayed to the gods for guidance, but Seth, the head of the angels, did not respond. Instead, Ungra sent down an incomprehensible oracle. The high priests of the main shrine of the empire and the elders of the Academy of Magic of Igut could not guess the exact meaning of this oracle, which only said, "Wait for Amon." Amon was already worshipped as a god in the city of Tuleng, and in the folklore of Igut, Amon was considered to be a god who had come to earth. Now that the army was approaching, many people began to miss Supreme General Amon, who had led the army and people of Igut to repel the Uruk legion. The people also knew that the situation of Igut was critical, and many people even called out to Amon during prayers, hoping that the god would come to earth again to save Igut. Did Ungra mean for the people of Igut to wait for the arrival of Amon and save the empire like last time? But where could they find Amon? After this god had completed his mission, he might have returned to the divine realm in heaven. In the end, the empire of Igut made the decision to surrender, which was subtly different from surrendering. It was based on the Hittite kingdom's surrender to Igut. They worshipped Cyrus, the king of Pots, as the emperor of Pots, and Igut became a vassal state of Pots. They were willing to build temples for the gods of Pots and pay tribute to the empire of Pots. The empire of Igut became the kingdom of Igut, and the kingdom of Pots became the empire of Pots. Although this was also a surrender without a fight, at least Pharaoh's throne in the country was preserved, a complete country was preserved, and the current rule of the noble group was still maintained. Therefore, it received the support of the majority of the court officials, and the only worry was that the kingdom of Pots would not agree. But this decision was already the bottom line of Merneptah. If surrendering and paying tribute were not enough, then they could only fight. Even if they completely surrendered, it would have to wait until they were defeated. Darius received the letter of Igut's willingness to surrender on the march, and hurriedly sent someone to send it to King Cyrus. Cyrus, on the other hand, analyzed the current situation. Just you had established many new provinces, the situation was still unstable, and the next strategic goal was to annex Babylon and Assur. For the time being, it was not the time to act against Egypt, so he agreed to the request of the Egyptian Empire. From this day on, Cyrus officially called himself the Emperor of Pots, and Pots became a true great empire. Cyrus the Great accepted Igut's request to surrender, but he made a condition. He wanted Merneptah, Pharaoh, to come to the border in person to kneel and salute him, and hold a ceremony to show his submission. So this time, Cyrus rushed to the border of Igut to accept the surrender of Merneptah, and at the same time to inspect the newly established provinces to show off his achievements to the whole continent. Along the way, he also had to hold a celebration ceremony, which gave Samir and the others the opportunity to assassinate him. According to Plan 1, after Cyrus held a celebration ceremony in the city of Nippur, he would continue west, cross the Euphrates River into the former territory of Hittite, and then follow the coastline south to the border of Cape States in Igut. Chapter 285. The great general, who had shaken the continent, was so young. He looked to be in his 20s. His exposed skin had a metallic bronze luster. He wore an armor without a helmet, with bright jewels hanging on his chest and ribbons on his shoulders. He was tall and strong, with short curly hair, a high nose, and deep eyes. His eyes were clear and deep, as if they were magical. Surrounded by his guards, Darius passed by a small town. It was a market town that had spontaneously formed by the side of the main road. It was a place for travelers and merchants to rest. It was also a place for the nearby villages to trade goods and buy various goods. The region east of the Euphrates River, the city of Kish, had not been ravaged by the war. Back then, Sennacherib's army had not arrived here, and Darius had conquered the city without a fight. Therefore, this region had not suffered any damage, and it looked just like before the war. There was a tavern by the side of the road. In front of the tavern was an open courtyard. There was no wall on the side facing the main road. There were a few tables and stools in the open space, with a row of stakes and stone troughs for horses to drink and feed. There were no large courier stations in such a small town. Taverns like this were common by the side of the main road, mainly for travelers to rest and drink their horses. This place used to be the crossings of the upper reaches of the Euphrates River, the trade route leading to the hinterland of Babylon. It used to be a prosperous place, but now, in times of war, there were fewer customers than before. Seeing the army passing by, only the children in the town hid in the corner, looking around curiously. Then they were called back home by the adults and quickly closed the door. Even the owner of the tavern was hiding in his room, looking out through the cracks in the window. However, there were two guests sitting at the table in the courtyard, each taking a table and drinking leisurely, as if they didn't see the murderous army passing by. A gust of wind blew by. Darius's well-trained guards suddenly smelled a strange aroma of wine. It was the aroma of the best wine in the world. How could it be in this small town? Although Kish had not experienced any war, the people's livelihood and economy were not as good as before due to the impact of the wars in the surrounding areas. Luxury goods were the first to be affected. Brewing wine consumed food, and during the war, the supply of wine would definitely be insufficient, especially when good wine was abnormally expensive and rare. Why would it appear in such a small tavern? The wine sold in these roadside taverns was turbid and bland, sour and astringent, the kind that drivers on the mainland often drank. Although the personal guards were surprised, none of them turned around to look. Even the horses' steps were not messed up, and they subconsciously raised their guard. Even if a true elite soldier did not sense any danger, even if there was a trace of abnormal aura in the surrounding environment, they would still be on guard. At this moment, an order was suddenly heard. The guards at the front of the procession suddenly stopped. They reined in their horses at the same time, almost without making too much noise. Then, the order to stop the march was passed to the rear. Like a wave, the entire army stopped. No one spoke, and there was no sound of weapons and armor clashing. The official road was filled with a somber atmosphere. The guards parted to make way for Darius. He dismounted from his horse and handed his sword to his followers. Then, he strode into the half-open courtyard. Everyone in the town was shocked. They did not know why the army stopped here. Watching the mighty general walk into the tavern, the owner of the tavern hid behind the window. He should have come out to greet the guests, but he could not move at all. Darius walked to a table, pulled out a stool, and sat down. Good wine. I did not expect to have such good wine in a place like this. Sitting opposite him was a handsome young man in a gray linen robe. His face was calm, and his facial features were full of determination. He smiled and took out another cup from thin air. He picked up the wine pot on the table and poured Darius a full cup of wine. He pushed it to Darius and said, "The Supreme General has a sharp nose. Did you get off the horse for this cup of wine?" Darius laughed and said, "Good wine should be drunk for a hero. I have led my army to the border of Igut, and I heard people calling for a general named Ammon. I did not expect to meet you here. What a coincidence." Sitting opposite Darius was Ammon. He raised his eyebrows slightly and asked, "Darius, do you know me?" Darius replied, "Your statue is erected in the city of Toleng." I have been there before. The master-level carving is just like you. Anyone who has seen it before would be able to recognize you at a glance. Why do you ask me this question? You were the General Igut, and I am the General Potts now. I believe you have heard that Igut has just surrendered to Potts. Are you waiting for me here? Amon raised his cup and said, I am drinking. You came here yourself. Darius raised his cup and said, let me toast to you. As a general on the battlefield, let me toast to your legend. Darius knew who was sitting in front of him, but he was not afraid at all. His subordinates were very disciplined. None of his guards came over without orders. The whole army was waiting quietly on the road. When they talked, they used magic to mute their voices. Only Darius and Amon could hear what they were talking about. Amon raised his cup and drank it up. I admire your courage. You know who I am, but you still dare to come here alone. Darius laughed. You are the one who should admire me. Even if you are Ammonius, you will not be able to stand the elite army of the undead. Amon, you once captured the king of Hittite, Lucier, and appeared at the hunting ground where Sinak was killed. Are you here to assassinate me today? It is not an assassination in front of the army. It is a one-on-one battle. Amon shook his head. I am not here to assassinate you. I am just a little curious. I want to see with my own eyes who defeated Goliath. I am a god, and according to the agreement of the gods, I will not attack a mortal directly. If I really want to kill you, I will send messengers to you. You must be careful. Darius's laughter suddenly became louder, causing the air around him to buzz. Even the table in front of him was trembling. He smiled and asked, So, did you see it clearly? It is I who defeated Goliath, and it is I who defeated the Anunnaki. Whether on earth or in the divine realm, Anu was defeated by me. This time it was Amon's turn to be surprised. When Darius laughed, there was a familiar aura. The supreme general in front of him seemed to be Marduk. Amon put down his cup and said softly, Darius, it is you. Darius replied with a hidden meaning, in the human world, I am Darius now. You must be curious how I did it. This is another state that I seek. You can call it the avatar of fruit. Along with the voice, a piece of information was imprinted in Amon's mind, explaining the identity of the supreme general who was drinking. It could be said to be extremely mysterious. Sitting in front of Amon was both Marduk and Darius, the general of Paz. But Marduk, the god, was creating his divine realm and immortality, unlike Anu, who came to the human world in the form of a new soul and became Goliath. When he came to the human world, Darius was him, and when he stayed in the divine realm, everything that Darius thought and experienced in the human world was equivalent to what he had experienced. This incarnation was actually a person in the human world. He was born in a noble family of the Neanderthal tribe in Paz, a Hermen. He was talented and brave since he was a child. At a young age, he made many outstanding achievements and was appointed as a general by Cyrus. So Darius would tell Amon that both Anu and Goliath were defeated by him. This state was different from that of a simple avatar. In fact, after Amon broke through the 9th level, he could split into another identity to act, and after becoming a god, he could naturally also change into various forms to face the world, but the situation was different from that of Darius. Everything that Darius did on earth was the confirmation of Marduk, his experiences were Marduk's knowledge, and the power that he cultivated would also become Marduk's growing power. Whether Darius, the man, could transcend eternal life, as long as he came to the human world and confirmed what Marduk wanted, it would be a success. And when Marduk came to the human world, it was as Darius. At this time, Darius would have the power of Marduk. Today, Amon could not do this, nor could Anu, the creator of the Anunnaki divine clan, and Anila, the creator of the Ennead divine clan, but Marduk had done it. Amon had been exploring higher realms of existence, and Darius, or Marduk, in front of him had given him a good confirmation, worthy of careful consideration. Amon could not help but be stunned, and asked in a deep voice, Why are you telling me this? Darius's smile actually looked a little naive, like a child, wearing a new dress, or like an adult, getting a good position, always can't help but want to show off to his neighbors. I am very lonely now, who else can understand what I am feeling at this moment? Only you, Amon. Thank you for making a special trip here to prepare good wine for me, how considerate. Amon continued to pour wine expressionlessly. I have to thank you too, at least you have given me an inspiration. Marduk's smile became a little cunning again. If that's the case, then I have to thank you even more. I heard that you have the title of Emperor Killer. Wherever you appear, there is always a human emperor who will be unlucky. I came to meet him this time, but I met you outside the city of Kish. According to Cyrus the Great's schedule, he should arrive in Kish this afternoon, but now it seems that he will not be able to. Like you, I am a god, and I will not directly attack a mortal unless he challenges me. Besides, I have my promise, and I will not hurt a king who believes in me. And I have cut off this incarnation of Darius, and everything I do in the human world will not go beyond this identity, otherwise there is no way to verify it. If someone succeeds in assassinating Cyrus, it may instead help me, so allow me to say my thanks in private. Amon's face changed slightly, and he suddenly realized a situation that he had not expected in advance. Even if Samir and Faust really succeeded in assassinating Cyrus, it was likely that they would not be able to save the Assyrian Empire. This assassination was based on the speculation that once Cyrus died, the tribes of Pots would fall into civil strife, and the newly established provinces would fall apart. Now it seemed that if Cyrus really died, the tribes of Pots would seize power in internal strife. But there was still such a supreme general with a large army, and his talent was no less than that of Cyrus, so they could take advantage of this opportunity to clean up the situation and ascend to the throne. Amon could even see that Darius would become an even more dazzling emperor of Pots in the human world. According to the first plan formulated by Bright Moon Knight, the assassination of Cyrus should be today, and whether they succeeded or not, the result was probably already set, and even if Amon wanted to stop it, it would be too late. With Darius here, the final result for the Assyrian Empire would be the same whether Cyrus died or not. But Darius just sat in front of him and drank, using magic to conceal his breath and talking with Amon. At this moment, Amon could not get accurate news from afar, so he could only sit here and drink with him, listening to the Supreme General of Pots talk in a boastful tone. Amon raised his cup again and said, Marduk, I want to congratulate you on the creation of another Supreme General of Pots in the human world. Darius smiled and raised his cup. You should call me Darius. As for the throne of Pots, I'm afraid it will take some time before I can obtain it. If there is no internal strife in Pots, there will be no such opportunity. My actions in the human world cannot go beyond the identity of Darius, and it may take some time to settle the situation. Did you send an emissary to participate in the assassination of Cyrus? Don't worry, my emissaries will not participate. Whether they can escape or not depends on their own ability. Amon's mood had calmed down, and he said lightly, what is there to be happy about? Get ready to go back to Pots to quell the rebellion. No matter how powerful General Darius is, it will take a few years. Darius was still smiling. Of course I am happy. Although I can't welcome Cyrus the Great, there is Ammonius who has set up the most beautiful wine in the world to wait for me, the future Supreme General of Pots. As I said when I sat down, a good wine should be drunk for a hero. At this moment, suddenly, a very impatient voice sounded, a good wine should be drunk for a hero? Are you kidding me? Good wine should be shared with beautiful women. The so-called heroes have always been drinking strong wine or bitter wine. As gods, is there a need for the two of you to sit in this place with the best wine in the world? How boring. Now that you are in the human world, you should drink the wine here in such a tavern. This is fun. The two gods were shocked at the same time and turned to look at a corner of the courtyard. There was originally a person sitting there. Although Amon and Darius had paid attention to him just now, they did not find anything unusual, so they did not pay attention to him. When they spoke, they isolated their voices. Not to mention the soldiers on the road, even the other gods could not hear them. But this person heard them. Not only did he hear them, but his voice penetrated the isolated space and reached Amon and Darius's ears. Darius turned around and shouted, "Who are you? Why are you here?" The person stood up and put down the wine glass. The glass was filled with the sour and bitter wine sold in this tavern. He was a middle-aged man. When he was sitting there, he did not attract much attention. Now that he stood up and spoke, there was a kind of dignified air about him. Even in front of Darius and Amon, he did not seem to be affected. He smiled and waved his hand. "I did not mean to eavesdrop on you two. It was you who insisted on sitting next to me and talking about these things. It was as if you were talking to me." Amon stood up and bowed. "May I know who you are?" The middle-aged man had broad shoulders and a thick back. His long blonde hair and beard were neatly combed. His blue eyes seemed to be bottomless. He smiled and said, "I came to the human world to pick up girls. I just happened to pass by. You two continue to talk. I will continue to look for my wine and beauties. The human world is so beautiful. Life is so wonderful. You two, why do you work so hard for nothing?" As he spoke, he put the money on the table and walked away with his hands clasped behind his back. On the road, he passed through the army and disappeared. Those soldiers in bright armor were still standing solemnly in formation. Unexpectedly, no one saw him. Darius and Amon looked at each other. Darius, who had been showing off a moment ago, now seemed to have lost interest. He asked Amon, "Do you know this person?" Amon shook his head. "I have never seen him." Darius muttered to himself, "He can hear us, he can make himself visible to us, and no one can see him. Among the gods, I can only think of Anu and Anu who can do this. But it can't be them. Could it be Zeus?" Amon answered for him. Darius slapped the table. "Yes, it should be him. Zeus, the Lord of Olympus. What is he doing here?" Amon shrugged. "He has already said that he is here to pick up girls. He just happened to pass by." "Darius, how can there be such a coincidence?" Amon sighed. "It is indeed a coincidence. The three most powerful gods on the continent are sitting and drinking in a tavern like this at the same time. I can't believe it either, but it happened." Darius turned out to be the human incarnation of Marduk. This made Amon realize that Samir and Faust's assassination of Cyrus was a futile risk. But as long as one lived in the world, one had to do something for one's vows. But in Marduk's view, doing so was equivalent to helping him indirectly. So when he picked up the wine opposite Amon, he looked like a child showing off his new clothes. But the sudden appearance and departure of Zeus was beyond their expectations. The two could not figure out what the Lord of Olympus wanted to do. The best wine in the world could no longer taste it. The two powerful gods on the continent seemed to feel an unknown that was beyond their control. Just then, 3 flying swords whizzed towards them from the distant horizon. The mages controlling the flying swords spared no effort in using their magic power to rush towards them at top speed. The soldiers on the official road were still unaware, but Darius and Amon had already noticed. Darius nodded. "Congratulations. It seems that someone has succeeded in assassinating Cyrus." Chapter 286. The assassination of Cyrus was very sudden, and no one had expected it. The time and place of the assassination was not during the celebration of the city. Although there were many people on that occasion, the security around Cyrus was the tightest, and there was no way to make arrangements in advance. In Bright Moon Knight's view, it was not a good opportunity for the assassination. When the celebration was over, Cyrus stayed in the city of Nippur for one night. The next morning, he set off west for the city of Kish, where General Darius would be waiting for him. Of course, the governor of Nippur would send him off, and the city would also hold a grand ceremony. The local military and political officials would follow Cyrus the Great out of the city, and outside the city, there would also be people kneeling to show the power of Cyrus the Great. The guards had long been on guard outside the city gate to prevent any assassins from sneaking into the crowd. Cyrus the Great was also guarded by masters. Even if there were assassins, the possibility of them breaking through the layers of guards to get close to Cyrus was very small, and the suspicious people would probably be killed before they could even get close. The incident happened suddenly when Cyrus the Great left the city, when everyone's guard was at its lowest. At that time, the military and political officials of the city of Nippur were lined up in the city with the carriage, and the guards that Cyrus the Great relied on were already outside the city. Cyrus's carriage happened to pass through the city gate. This was an almost impossible place to assassinate, because Cyrus was in the city gate, and the tower was heavily guarded. There were experts in front and behind him, inside and outside the city, and yet someone had fired an arrow. The arrow was shot from within the city. The archer was standing among the crowd watching Cyrus the Great's chariot leave the city. If Ammon saw this arrow, he would not be unfamiliar with it. It was a giant black arrow engraved with the inscriptions of magic. The arrow was shot with terrifying momentum, and with a sound like a tsunami, it streaked through the air. Drawing a parabola, he passed by the group of officials who were sending him off, and shot towards the city gate. The giant arrow flew through the air with a terrible shock wave, and wherever it passed, people and horses were thrown off their feet. The arrow came from behind, which surprised everyone. According to common sense, if an assassin really wanted to kill Cyrus, he should have set up an ambush outside the city. But the imperial guards around Cyrus were well trained and did not panic because of the power of the arrow. Countless rays of sword light slashed at the sky, and the mages cast various magic spells to protect the inside of the gate. The arrow was imbued with powerful energy and clashed with several sword auras in the air. It paused for a few seconds before continuing forward. It was almost the same situation as when the Holy Maiden of Isis was assassinated. But no matter how powerful the arrow was, it could not penetrate the protection set up by the mages. Unexpectedly, the arrow did not shoot at Cyrus. At the last moment, it turned upward and hit the wall right above the gate. With a loud bang, the entire tower collapsed. The west gate of the city of Nippur needed to be introduced. Below the thick city wall was the city gate, and above the city gate was a tower. It looked sturdy and majestic, and it was brand new. When Sinek attacked the city of Nippur, the gate was destroyed by a catapult, and the tower was set on fire. Although the gate was repaired later, it was only a simple restoration of its defensive function. Upon receiving the news that Cyrus the Great was about to arrive, the local military and political officials urgently conscripted laborers and craftsmen to repair two magnificent city towers, the East Gate and the West Gate, because they were places to welcome and bid farewell to Cyrus the Great. The West Tower was completed just a few days before the arrival of Cyrus the Great. It was built overnight without sparing manpower and material. Of course, there were city guards and mages supervising the work during the construction to prevent the craftsmen from cutting corners or using other tricks. Even every layer of brick had to be inspected. No one expected that there would be any problems with the tower. But there was a trap in the tower, set up by Bright Moon Knight, who was proficient in assassination. Bright Moon Knight and Dums did not follow Queen Samir to the border patrol. They left Assur ahead of time and came to the new province of Pots. Bright Moon Knight somehow managed to sneak into the craftsmen who were building the tower. Nippur was a city that had recently been occupied by Pots, and most of its residents had been moved here by Sinek. The occupying forces of Pots were not familiar with the local people. They urgently summoned the craftsmen to build the tower, but they could only conduct a strict body search and careful inspection. They could not verify the identity of the craftsmen one by one, which gave Bright Moon Knight an opportunity. This trap was very well hidden, similar to the trap that Enlil had encountered years ago. When the tower was completed, even a supreme mage would not be able to detect any abnormalities when he scanned it with detection magic. Well, it took a lot of power to detonate this trap, and it also needed to be very clever. For those who did not know the inside story, even if they used a catapult to destroy the tower, the trap would not react. The archer was not Samir, but Bright Moon Knight herself who had set the trap. When the black magic arrow arced through the air and shot towards the gate, there was suddenly a green light wrapped around the arrow, and it was as if it had been entangled by a giant green snake, turning horizontally and shooting into the tower. This was Dum's help. 2 rows of thin stone bricks above the gate turned into quicksand-like fragments at the same time, as if they had been cut by a knife, and a terrible huge crack appeared. The support structure of this building was not afraid of a small number of stones cracking, but of the sudden sliding and displacement of the whole structure. And the trap set by Bright Moon Knight was hidden because it did not turn all the stone bricks in the 2 cracks into powder. Only through the impact of the energy of the giant arrow, it instantly cracked 2 pieces of stone deep in the wall, and then under the huge weight of the tower, the gate would collapse. And Cyrus happened to pass by, and his calculation could not be said to be not exquisite. Bright Moon Knight shot the arrow, and then saw the tower collapse, but he did not even look at it, leaped high with a roar, turned around, and flew away. His task had been completed, and his identity as an assassin had been exposed, so naturally he had to escape thousands of miles away. The main guards of Nippur were around the west gate, so he ran east. The masters were busy protecting the emperor at the moment and had no time to catch up with him, and the ordinary guards could not stop him. If it had been someone else, Bright Moon Knight would have been enough to solve the problem, but how could Emperor Cyrus be assassinated so easily? At the moment when the tower collapsed, screams and roars rang out, and countless rays of light rose. Space seemed to freeze for a moment, and the carriage Cyrus was riding in suddenly fell apart. 2 supreme mages raised their staffs high, and several supreme warriors surrounded him as they rushed out of the city. Behind them, smoke and dust rose, and the whole tower completely collapsed, but Cyrus was not buried in it. However, the other imperial guards around the great emperor were not so lucky. At least a dozen of them did not manage to escape in time and were smashed into meat paste on the spot. The falling rubble also injured many people in the escort team inside and outside the city. Although Cyrus was unharmed, he looked very embarrassed. He abandoned the carriage and rushed out of the city. There were only 5 experts at the city gate to escort him out of danger, while the rest of the guards were buried in the collapsed city tower. The scene immediately became chaotic. Screams rang out from inside and outside Nippur at the same time. Someone shouted, "Cyrus is dead." And the people near the gate also scattered in all directions, even the guards on guard could not restrain them. The captain of the guards next to Cyrus raised his sword and shouted, drowning out all the voices, "The emperor is safe and sound. Beware of the assassins, do not panic." Then a dozen figures flew into the air. Cyrus's guards of honor and half of the masters had already left the city to clear the way in front. At this moment, the mages turned and flew to the top of the tower. The assassin had appeared inside the city, and Ming Yuyi had already escaped. However, another figure flew high into the sky, dressed in a black robe and holding a staff. He flew over like an eagle and threw out several scrolls with a wave of his hand. Although the scrolls did not consume the user's own magic power, they still required the user to control the range of their attack. Accurately locking onto a target is much more difficult than randomly throwing them out. Furthermore, controlling 2 scrolls is more than twice as difficult as controlling 1 scroll. The more powerful the scroll is, the more powerful it is. The more powerful the scroll. But this person actually threw out 6 high-level attack scrolls at the same time, firmly targeting the guards who had just rushed out of the smoke and dust. They were all launched almost at the same time. This assassin was Faust. Faust flew into the sky and threw out the scrolls, which was tantamount to exposing himself and attracting all the attention. He simply did not care about his life. When the scrolls flew out, he couldn't immediately escape. He had to control the direction of the attack after the scrolls were launched, otherwise he wouldn't be able to lock on to a target. He could only grit his teeth and wave his staff, adding several magic shields on himself. Light shone in the air, and the arrows on the ground were like rain, almost all of them hitting Faust in the air. The arrows shot by ordinary warriors weren't dangerous, but the arrows shot by the elite warriors at Cyrus's side were astonishingly powerful. Mixed among the arrows were all sorts of weapons, such as axes, flagpoles, spears, swords, and so on. Some of the warriors weren't equipped with bows and arrows, so they simply slashed out with the weapons in their hands. All kinds of explosions and shockwaves from the energy explosion spread in all directions. All kinds of weapon fragments flew everywhere in the air. The places close to the ground were filled with smoke, light and flames. 7 or 8 figures fell from the sky with miserable cries. It wasn't that these mages couldn't dodge when the scrolls exploded, but they had to protect Cyrus the Great on the ground, and could only stubbornly block this round of attacks. The magic shields around Faust's body were shattered in almost an instant, and the black robe on his body was torn to shreds, revealing his long white gown. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and the staff in his hand fell to the ground. It was swept up by the surging power, and sent flying into the distance towards the city. At this moment, a green light flew out, transforming into a terrifying serpent in the air that wrapped around Faust's body, and fiercely shot towards the north. Dums had gone to pick up the seriously injured Faust, but the experts around Cyrus had no time to give chase, because the real assassination of Emperor Boz just happened to be happening at this very moment. The unforeseen event happened too quickly, and the scene was too chaotic. First, the city tower collapsed, and Cyrus abandoned his carriage and rushed out of the city. Apart from a few experts around him, the guards on both sides of the carriage were all killed in action. The collapse of the city tower also split his escort team into two, and the front and back could not communicate with each other. The people who came to see him off cried out in fear. The people inside the city didn't know what the situation outside the city was like, and the people outside the city were even less clear about the situation inside the city. In the midst of the chaos, Faust dropped down from the sky and threw out the scroll. In an instant, another violent explosion occurred. Not only did the mages who had just flown into the sky fall to the ground, the warriors near the city gate were also thrown into a complete mess. Only flashes of light could be seen before their eyes, and only the buzzing echoes could be heard in their ears. Bright Moon Knight had shot the arrow from inside the city, and Faust had also flown out of the city, attracting the attention of all the guards outside the city. The Imperial Guards hurriedly turned around and rushed towards the direction of the city gate to protect the Emperor. The mages also turned around and took out their staffs, and those who reacted quickly had already flown into the air. The guards outside the city relaxed for a moment, and Cyrus the Great himself also turned around to look at the top of the city tower. Just as Faust was about to be sent flying, Samir finally made his move. The Empress was dressed in shabby clothes, and her robe was very loose with patches. She looked like a poor woman who was slightly exhausted, mingling with the crowd outside the city to watch the show. When Cyrus' honor guards left the city, she also prostrated herself in the crowd to pay her respects. After the great change, screams of horror rang out. The power of Faust's attack spread far and wide, and the panicked people were swept to the ground one after another while running around. Samir took advantage of the situation and somersaulted. When she landed, she happened to be in a half-kneeling position. She had already steadily knocked her bow. The bow was the magic bow she often used, but the arrow was the fanged arrow that Gilgamesh had used to assassinate Sinuc. The white fanged arrow was shot out, mixed with the shock waves of various kinds of magic energy, and flashed away. It seemed as if it had passed through time and space, appearing to be light and silent. But Samir, who was half-kneeling on the ground, moved so solemnly, as if she had turned into a hard stone statue. All the strength in her body seemed to have been sucked out by the arrow. The guards who were turning to look behind them did not stop the arrow, and most of the Imperial Guards did not even notice it at all. If Samir's arrow had been used to assassinate Cyrus, it would have been powerful, but it was also unlikely to succeed. But now was a good opportunity. The earth-shattering attacks inside the city were all a cover for the silent arrow outside the city. The captain of the guards next to Cyrus suddenly became alert. He turned around and swung his fist with all his might. The sword in his hand had just flown into the sky. The other supreme mage closest to Cyrus also sensed the danger. In a moment of desperation, he shook his staff and covered Cyrus with a layer of tough and invisible air elemental armor. With a bang, the captain of Cyrus's imperial bodyguards flew back with a muffled groan. A white arrow mysteriously appeared and shot Cyrus. The arrow was so fast that it could hardly be seen with the naked eye. It was silent, but it contained a huge amount of energy, enough to send a hurried supreme warrior flying. Affected by the air elemental armor, the arrow slowed down, even leaving a dazzling light in the air. But it still passed through the air elemental armor and sank into the back of Cyrus. It came out from his chest and landed lightly on the ground. There was not even a trace of blood on the shaft. Cyrus was hit in the back by the arrow. The all-powerful emperor slowly reached out to cover the broken part of his breastplate and looked at the arrow on the ground with an incredulous expression. It seemed that it took a while for him to realize what had happened. He wanted to turn around to see who the assassin was, but as soon as he moved, his legs gave way and he was about to fall. The imperial guards rushed up to support him, and the light from the priest's staff enveloped him. There were cries of alarm in his ears, but the sound became more and more distant and ethereal. His vision darkened, and blood had stained the armor on his chest and back. There was still a lot of noise in the city of Nippur, but there was a strange silence outside the city gate. Except for the few masters around Cyrus who shouted in horror, "Your Majesty!" The imperial guards around him were all stunned, unable to believe what they had seen with their own eyes. The outermost soldiers of the Guard of Honor were the first to see Samir's movements, and immediately rushed forward to catch the assassin. But at this moment, there was a sound of waves surging in the wilderness, and almost everyone was hallucinating. The earth was surging and undulating, turning into a wave, and the waves were rolling to drown everyone. People waved their arms and screamed in horror, but even they could not hear the sounds in their throats. This was an illusion launched by Rulio. Several high-grade achievers immediately focused their minds and broke the illusion's interference, but they only saw the people and soldiers struggling in panic. The assassin who shot the arrow had disappeared. The assassination plan of Bright Moon Knight was naturally based on the style of the best assassin on the continent. Everyone would launch the most dangerous blow at the most appropriate moment, and then escape without getting entangled. The last arrow finally hit its target. Samel only had one chance to kill Cyrus, and she succeeded. One could imagine the chaos in the city of Nippur that day. Cyrus the Great was unexpectedly assassinated, and all the masters immediately began to track down the assassin. At the same time, some people rushed to the city of Kish to report to General Darius, who came to welcome the emperor, but the assassin had already escaped without a trace. According to the original plan, after the assassination, Samir would sneak back to the Assyrian border and continue to patrol the border guards, while Faust would be ordered to return to Nippur to deal with the possible complications. No one knew that they had left quietly, and everything seemed to be carried out seamlessly. The injured Faust returned the fastest, because Dums, who took him away, was astonishingly fast. A day after Faust's return, Samir, escorted by Rulio, returned to the queen's carriage. Cyrus was dead, and Nippur would certainly be in chaos for a while. The Assyrian Empire finally had a chance to breathe, but the fate of Assyria depended on whether they could take this opportunity to restore their strength. Samir sent Faust back to the capital, and at the same time secretly told him not to rush back. He also told him not to let his injury worsen, and to focus on healing after returning to the capital. But he could not reveal that he was seriously injured, so as not to arouse suspicion. However, Faust did not listen to the queen's advice. He was eager to return, and regardless of his injury, he rushed back to Nippur almost day and night. The actions of the sage imperial preceptor were not surprising, because no one knew that he was injured, and the news that Cyrus the Great had been assassinated had already spread, so it was reasonable for the empress to urgently send him back to the imperial capital during her inspection. Chapter 287. No one could see any injuries on Faust's body. Perhaps it was because he had worked through the night. The Supreme Mage's expression was slightly weary. Faust's injuries were not light, but the sage imperial teacher had his own sense of propriety. He could hide it well, not letting others see through him, and not letting his injuries flare up and endanger his life. He was the most brilliant mage in the empire. Faust was in such a hurry because he wanted to return to the capital as soon as possible to release Maganlii. When he returned, the Empress' pardon would take effect. With the death of Cyrus, Faust felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He finally felt a trace of real relief, and the inexplicable sense of guilt in his heart also faded a lot. Empress Samir pardoned Maganlii. The content of the pardon was very simple. It was roughly as follows: Maganlii had prayed in the shrine, begging the gods to grant her magic medicine to cure the illness of his mother. Her pious prayers moved the gods and were heard by the sage imperial teacher, Faust, who granted her the best healing medicine. Maganlii's sincerity had passed the test of the gods, and it was impossible for her to be the murderer of the matriarch. The sage imperial teacher, Faust, who the whole nation believed in, could testify to this, and no one could doubt him. As for Hisma's death, it was an accident. The warrior could not stand steadily due to his injuries and fell to the ground, crashing into the wall and dying. Identifying Maganlii as the murderer is a blasphemy against the will of the gods and disrespectful to the sage imperial teacher. Samir's way of doing things was simple and clear. There was no unnecessary explanation for the pardon, and she had borrowed Faust's name. No one else knew about the relationship between Maganlii and Faust. Even if there were people who were dissatisfied with the pardon, they would not dare to say anything. If there were complaints in private, it would only be directed at the Empress, and it would not affect Faust's reputation. Instead, it would show the Empress respect for Faust. If Faust was smart, he would not have personally delivered the pardon, or even sent someone himself. He would have found a seemingly unrelated person and sent the pardon in the name of the Empress. But as soon as he entered Niue City, he rushed to the prison. In the eyes of outsiders, this might be the only thing that the sage imperial tutor had done that went against common sense. But Faust couldn't care less. Maganlii had been detained for almost a month as a prisoner on death row. She didn't know that she would be pardoned, and had been waiting for death in despair. Would that kind and weak woman be able to bear it? Now that Faust had suddenly been ordered to return to the capital during his inspection with the Empress, it had long attracted the attention of various forces in Niue City. But this sage imperial preceptor didn't go to the temple, nor did he go to the government office. After entering the city, he went straight to the prison. The sheriff and the officials of the empire's justice department also rushed over. They did not know what had happened, but they were worried that it had something to do with their duties. Faust's arrival gave the guards of the prison a fright. According to their recollection, the sage imperial preceptor had never come to such a place before. This place was gloomy and filthy, symbolizing the sinful corner of the imperial capital. It was indeed not a place that Faust should come to. Everyone waited for Faust to dismount from his horse in fear and trepidation. The guards put down their weapons and knelt down to kiss the soil under his feet. Their attitude was respectful and devout, as if they were welcoming the arrival of a god. Faust didn't forget his etiquette. His attitude was humble and amiable, and his expression was graceful and noble. He waved his hand and said, "You all have duties to perform. Stand up and continue your duties. There is no need to salute like this. Who is the officer of the prison? I have something to ask." The officer of the prison quickly stepped forward and bowed. "This lowly one is. May I ask what instructions does the imperial preceptor have for me?" The officer of the prison should have invited Faust to his own magistrate's office to sit down and talk, but his magistrate's office was a little shabby. It was the outermost room in the prison, not suitable for the sage imperial preceptor who was revered by the whole nation to sit. Even inviting him in would be a kind of blasphemy. Faust waved his hand and said, "His Majesty has given me a pardon order to pardon a person in the prison." He hadn't taken out the pardon order, and the prison officer didn't dare to stretch out his hand to ask for it. He only asked as carefully as possible, "Who is it? Pardon his sentence or pardon his crime? How could I trouble the imperial preceptor to personally come over for such a small matter? Just send someone over to greet me." The pardon order was divided into two types: general pardon and special pardon. General pardon was divided into pardon of punishment and pardon of crime. The so-called pardon meant that the crime was not changed, but the punishment was exempted or reduced. Pardon, on the other hand, meant that there was no punishment at all. According to Assyrian law, only the king had this kind of power. The prison officer had deliberately asked this question, afraid that he would appear incompetent. Only then did Faust realize that it was a little strange for him to personally come to the prison as soon as he entered the city. But since he was already here, he pretended to be relaxed and said, "This is something that Her Majesty the Empress specifically instructed me to do before I left, so I did it as soon as I came back, lest I forget about it when I get busy." He took out Samir's pardon order and handed it over. The prison officer respectfully received it and opened it. Suddenly, sweat broke out on his forehead, and his legs turned to jelly. He knelt down and kowtowed, "Forgive me, Her Majesty, forgive me, Imperial Preceptor. I never thought that it would be like this. Otherwise, this would never have happened." Faust was taken aback, and hurriedly asked, "What happened?" The prison officer was still explaining in a trembling voice, "Although there were orders to temporarily detain Meganlii until Her Majesty the Empress returns, her crime has already been determined and she is on death row. We did not know that there would be a special pardon. During this period of time, everyone thought that she would be executed when Her Majesty the Empress returns, but no one tortured or mistreated her. It was herself." Before he could finish, Faust had already reached out and lifted the prison officer up. He covered his face with his hair and asked, "What happened to Meganlii?" The prison officer replied, "Meganlii died. She died on her own. She doesn't eat anything." Faust felt the prison door in front of him shake, and the ground under his feet also moved. He could not help but say in a hoarse voice, "How is this possible? When did this happen?" The prison officer was scared out of his wits, and replied in a trembling voice, "Just 2 days ago. The weather has been too hot recently, and no one has come to collect the corpse. She was just cremated yesterday. She died without any pain at all. She seemed to be smiling. Someone heard that she had been singing the entire night before. It was a song of blessings and praises to the gods. She must have been received by the gods to heaven." The prison officer was caught off guard and was lifted up by Faust. His entire body was suspended in midair, unable to move. Faust suddenly loosened his grip, and the prison officer fell to the ground with a plop. He hurriedly climbed back up and shouted, "Lord Imperial Preceptor." Faust stood there, swaying once, twice, thrice. Finally, he could no longer support himself and fell backwards. His attendants had long since cried out in alarm to support him, but when they looked again, Faust had already fainted. His injuries had flared up. He had thought that these injuries could be completely controlled, but at this moment, they were so violent that Faust's vision turned black, as if he had been transported to another world. In the eyes of others, the sage Imperial Preceptor had suddenly fainted, but Faust himself felt as if he was awake, only that he had sunk into darkness. Everything in the darkness was light, as if the soul had already left the body. Faust heard a faintly discernible song. It was Meganlii singing, "It's him. It's him. Where did the happiness and pain of the world come from? In the first night of passion when I first saw you. It's him. It's him. Who saved me from my lowly helplessness? I waited for you in the secluded courtyard. It's him. It's him. Do you know how difficult it was for me to approach? But I still snuggled by your side. It's him. It's him. Who left in sorrow with the sound of the bell. Please do not mention me to anyone. It's him. It's him. Whose gaze is the god watching me? I knew you would come." Faust struggled to shout, "Meganlii. Why didn't you wait for me to return? I should have told you earlier that I would return to the capital with a special pardon, but you." The voice of Meganlii replied, "I knew you would come to save me. I am grateful for everything you have given me, but I do not know what else I can do. Hismu's family is ruined, and what have I brought you? At the last moment of my life, I suddenly recognized you. We have met before, but I am still grateful to you. God, please take me away, this is my salvation. A brand in his soul pricked Faust again. He shouted, "Oh Sudan, is this all you have guided me to?" Sudan's figure appeared, still as handsome and bewitching as ever. Behind him was a layer of mist, and within the mist was a shadow with a sharp horn and a forked tail. He sneered, "No, you have done all this yourself. Your soul is the master, and the power that I guide you is only a servant. Have you forgotten? You once asked me how to obtain your soul. In fact, no one can obtain your soul unless you voluntarily submit. The brand I have left in your heart has only awakened your desires, ideals, and struggles. It is you who have given all the answers. I tell you, my name is Sudan. When I am in your heart, you are me. Just like when you heard the song of Megan Tears, it was her, the one in your heart who was singing." Faust shouted, "No, I am not you." Sudan said, "Then open your eyes and see what choice you have made. In fact, everyone has a you in their heart, I have seen too many." Faust said in a hoarse voice, "I should not hate you. I have done all this, and I must face it, face the me in my heart. But Sudan, my soul no longer belongs to you." Sudan's voice suddenly changed, "It has never belonged to me." At the same time, his appearance changed as well, unexpectedly turning into the figure of Ammon. Faust was aghast, "It is you." Ammon said, "It is me, it was me in the beginning. The so-called Sudan is a title given to me by Seth, and the brand left in your soul is only a reflection of your desires. I have just arrived at Nive, and happened to see you fainting in front of the prison, so I appeared in your soul to meet you. Faust, your condition is very bad now, and you are about to pass a test, but your injuries are uncontrollable. If you have any last request, you can say it." Faust said, "In this darkness, I can feel no pain, I hope that I do not open my eyes to see all this." Ammon said, "You have already closed your eyes, if you do not want to open them, then leave, and you will never see this world again." If there is a new life for the soul, when you open your eyes, what do you hope to see? Faust said, "A beautiful new world, the world that I have read widely and painstakingly searched for, the world that I have vowed to see. I have fought for it all my life, never stopping, and tried my best to save the Assyrian Empire, but in the end, I could not even save a single Meganlii." Ammon's tone was full of sadness. "What you want is the end of the human desire, but as a mortal you cannot verify it. You have already achieved the 9th level of magic, and I have guided you to the power of the origin. When you verify it again, at this time, you are faced with the endless test of life and death. You will verify countless him and her, and countless me, but your injuries are no longer bearable. Do you intend to leave in this darkness, or do you want to do something last? Officer Mao told me that Meganlii must have been received by the gods to the divine kingdom, right? She has completed her redemption. But I did not do it, did I?" These were the last words that Faust said to Ammon. After saying this, Faust did not wait for Ammon to answer, and had already opened his eyes in the darkness. What he saw in front of him was not a beautiful new world, nor was it the divine kingdom that he yearned for, but the dome of the temple. The sage imperial tutor suddenly fainted in front of the prison, and was hurriedly sent back to the temple for treatment. The nobles in the capital all came to visit, each with their own thoughts, not knowing what had happened. They were all secretly worried. When Faust opened his eyes, he heard someone exclaim, "Thank God, the sage imperial tutor has awakened." The old prime minister of the empire, Alpha, stood in front of the bed and asked, "Lord imperial tutor, why did you rush to the prison as soon as you returned to the capital, and why did you faint in front of the prison? The news has spread, and the people are uneasy. I heard that you went to the prison with an amnesty warrant, but the person who was pardoned is already dead. What is going on?" The assistant minister, Lard, also asked, "Lord imperial tutor, are you all right? Are you feeling unwell because of overwork? Or are you sad that the woman is dead, and that His Majesty could not fulfill His Majesty's decree? The woman herself has already confessed to the crime, and it is the benevolence of God, His Majesty, and the Lord Imperial Tutor to pardon her. It is a pity that she did not have such a good fate. Faust sat up on the bed, and spread his arms towards the sky. No, she is not guilty, the real murderer is me. I heard the people's private discussions, you have all heard of the case, right? It was I who killed Hism. Everyone was stunned. No one had expected Faust to say such words the moment he woke up. Could it be that the sage imperial tutor had gone mad? Faust did not care about the expressions of the people, and continued to narrate to himself, back then, I had once disguised myself and went to a brothel to fool around. I was the one who injured Hism and disappeared, and Hism destroyed the brothel to seek revenge. Heavens! Everyone revealed expressions of disbelief. How could this be something that the sage imperial tutor would do? Someone tried to rush over to stop Faust from leaving. However, an invisible force blocked them. Faust sat there with his arms open, and no one could approach him. Someone shouted, Lord Imperial Tutor, please shut up, don't say any more. We don't want to hear it, and we don't dare to hear it. This was not done by you, it can't be you. Some people covered their ears, but Faust's words were as clear as if they had drilled into their souls. No matter how they covered their ears, they could not block it. Not only did it reach the ears of the people in the temple, but it also went out of the temple, and even half of the people in Nive city heard it. Those who heard it were stunned. Many housewives stopped what they were doing, and the pedestrians on the street stopped their footsteps, listening to the voice that represented solemnity and holiness in the empire. Faust told everything that had happened between him and Meganlii, and finally shouted, It was I who seduced her, it was I who possessed her, it was I who brought her bad luck, it was I who gave her that bottle of medicine, it was I who killed Hism, it was I who watched her be taken to prison and become a prisoner on death row. Her life was trampled, her name was spat upon, and she bore and redeemed the sin that originally belonged to me. She didn't even know that I was that person back then. The sage imperial tutor's narration finally came to an end, and the people inside and outside the temple were all stunned. Faust opened his arms and looked up at the sky. His line of sight seemed to have passed through the dome of the temple, and he saw Ammon, Gabriel, Samuel, and Rulio standing on the clouds in the distance. Faust's posture seemed to be hugging something, but his figure turned into a wisp of green smoke, passing through the temple and drifting away. Samuel had come, right in the clouds. The Empress was supposed to still be on her way to patrol the border and would arrive at another city in 2 days, but now she was brought here by Ammonius. She had witnessed the last scene of Faust in this world with her own eyes, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. Faust turned into a wisp of green smoke and disappeared. Samuel suddenly pulled out the sword at his waist, turned around, and pointed it at Ammon's throat, and shouted sternly, God, was it you? Did you guide him to do all this? Ammon's face was full of sorrow, as if he did not see Samuel's sword at all. He muttered to himself, Faust, you dominated the soul at the last moment and completed the redemption. You passed the test, and at this moment, you had reached the end of your human achievements, but you left because of your injuries. Your final achievement was to redeem your own soul, and you could choose to leave with a clear mind. When you were reborn, all the traces could still be preserved to complete the unfinished quest. You are a name, and there is a Satan in your heart. There is a you in everyone's heart. When the last moment came, you finally proved the master of the soul. Gabriel flashed, holding the blade of order in front of Samuel, and said, Anyone in the world can be in the same situation as Faust, the only difference is that they are not the sage imperial tutor of Assur. Why did you point your sword at the gods? Ammon only guided him to see his own desires, and he has been making his own choice. Chapter 288. 269. The prairie fire. Ammon bowed his head and replied, I grieve for Meganlii. I witnessed the story between her and Faust, but I still let it happen. Her fate is not my fault, but I met her and did nothing. This is the regret of a god. I can understand Faust's grief. Gabriel turned around and said, My God, what you saw was the world, and you could not make it the kingdom of heaven that you vowed, but I am also a little surprised that you have come to such an end after experiencing it. Although you were far away at that time, did you not hear Maganliai's call to the gods? Aman said sadly, the god she called should be Enril, maybe also Faust. Enril has fallen, but his name is still a symbol, a hope of Maganliai. Gabriel, do you know where I went wrong? Aman actually asked Gabriel where he went wrong. The angel who had transcended eternal life replied, my God, you are not wrong, but you are different from them. When you were only a child, I saw you. Although your experience was full of hardships and trials, Aman, who walked out of Duk, was born like a god. Perhaps when you wielded that heavy hammer at a young age, you were forged with perseverance and calmness. The Dushan's 1,000-year bloodline and the harsh and desolate environment have created a different kind of you. I only saw you lose your mind when Maria left. You felt weak and angry, impulsive regardless of the consequences, and helpless in the face of setbacks. Apart from that, no matter how many difficulties you encountered, your footsteps were never disorderly. A young man who was banished to the mountains into a tribe of cavemen was worshipped as a god. This is something no one else can do. That is why you became the Ammonius of today. Although you passed the test of endless life and death in your early years, and the thousands of creatures could not shake your will, the people of this world, they are not you. The people of this world are Faust, perhaps not as knowledgeable and accomplished as him. The people of this world are also Maganliai, perhaps not as humble and weak as her. You met Wendy in the Gate of God and brought her back to the Garden of Eden, but can your Garden of Eden accommodate so many Faust and Maganliai? You gave Faust guidance and finally let him dominate the soul, but the other humble Maganliai has also been trying to dominate her own soul. She is not you, nor is she Faust, just a weak mortal, struggling in the face of fate. If you had not met her, I would have nothing to say. But you witnessed it, but you only focused on Faust and ignored her. For you, witnessing a weak and humble person dominate her own soul may be more meaningful than paying attention to the assassination of Cyrus the Great. Empress Samir pointed her sword at you, not because you did something wrong, but because she felt resentful and helpless, just like her own life was full of helplessness. As a god, you will bear the questioning of the gods. As for how you look at it, it depends on what kind of god you want to be. When Gabriel finished speaking, Aman looked up at the sky and said, in the human world, the so-called strong like Faust and the so-called weak like Maganliai may be the footprints that are missing from my experience, but they are the most common ones everywhere. When I left the human world to create a divine kingdom, I did not expect to complete my final quest here, and my own experience is also full of regrets. Samir, who was at the side, was deep in thought and had slowly sheathed her sword. Aman looked at her through Gabriel's shoulder and asked, I have told you about Marduk. Although Cyrus is dead, I am afraid there are only a few years left for the Assyrian Empire, and Potts will soon make a comeback. What are your plans? Samir stared at the direction in which Faust disappeared and replied, he is gone, and I understand that without him, I cannot control and govern this empire as I wish. After Seneca's death, there have been people in the kingdom who have been trying to support his son to succeed the throne and restore the previous state policy. Now I might as well leave it to them and let these people get their wish. Before the Potts Empire makes a comeback, I hope they can be prepared, but I can already see the end. Rulio whispered, Empress, are you going to retire? Why don't you go to the Garden of Eden and become an envoy of Ammonius? Samir shook her head, and suddenly a pair of white wings spread out behind her, and she flew south without saying a word. Rulio shouted, Samir, where are you going? Samir's voice replied from afar, I have to take care of the last things and hand over the throne to Seneca's son, and I will go to the north of the Saya Plateau, where the Reese River originates, and live in seclusion. That is also where my people have lived for generations. What Faust could not find, I want to continue to search for. I wish you good luck in the Garden of Eden. Rulio watched Samir leave, and said to Aman with some regret, My God, she refused the invitation of the Garden of Eden, but that pair of wings is like an angel in the Garden of Eden. Aman narrowed his eyes and said, Those are the wings of a white pigeon. It is said that when Samir was still a baby, a flock of white pigeons flew around her, and even used their wings to keep her warm. She was discovered by a couple and brought home. She has already received guidance, and she has her own desire to seek confirmation. At this moment, she has spread her wings and is finally free from fate. You all go back to the Garden of Eden, I am going to open up our kingdom of heaven. After saying this, Aman turned around and stepped into the void, once again disappearing from the world. In the next few years, the things that happened on the continent were unimaginable, but they were all within Aman's expectations. Cyrus was suddenly assassinated, and the newly rising Potsdam Empire did indeed fall into internal strife. Cyrus' son, Cambyses, sent a high priest named Gamorder to secretly execute his younger brother, who might have competed with him for the throne, and then went on an expedition to succeed the throne. Cambyses replaced his father, Cyrus, and arrived at the border of Igut, receiving the worship of the pharaohs of Igut, Merneptah. But just as Cambyses was heading to the border of Igut, the high priest Gamorder seized the opportunity to seize power in the name of the executed younger brother. Cambyses heard the news and hurried back to Potsdam with his army, but he died on the way. Some said he contracted an illness, some said he was injured in battle, and some said he was assassinated. Gamorder seized the throne, but he was unable to convince the masses. The Potsdam Empire fell into internal strife, and the conquered Elam kingdom took the opportunity to become independent. The remaining provinces also showed signs of falling apart. A few years later, the great general Darius, who was from the Neanderthal tribe, launched a coup, killed Gamorder, and ascended the throne. Then, he spent another 2 years to pacify the internal divisions and the various regions. Not only did he restore the prosperity of Cyrus, but the Potsdam Empire also continued to expand. Only then did Igut truly submit to Potsdam, and Assur and Babylon were destroyed one after another. From the assassination of Cyrus to the ascension of Darius, a total of 8 years had passed. From the ascension of Darius to the conquest of Assur, it took him another 2 years. In other words, the assassination of Cyrus by Faust and Samir gave the Assur Empire a total of 10 years of breathing space. Unfortunately, this empire was already in its twilight, and had not yet recovered its former glory. In front of the powerful Potsdam, it was still vulnerable. Aman once said that it would take at least 2 to 3 years for Darius to take control of the situation, but in fact, Darius spent even more time. He was not in a hurry. Instead, he waited for the signs of internal strife to appear, and then suddenly launched an attack to eliminate all the hidden dangers and stabilize the rule of the Potsdam Empire. Darius led his army to the border, and the battle at the front line collapsed as soon as he touched it. The son of Sinak and the ministers of Assur immediately decided to surrender. Darius only fought a hard battle, and then immediately annexed the Assur Empire. If the Potsdam Empire had a battle to conquer Assur, then the conquest of Babylon was almost effortless. When the Potsdam Empire conquered Assur and sent its army south, Marduk had already sent down an oracle, ordering the kingdom of Babylon not to resist. King Benut wanted to fight, but unfortunately, he had lost the support of the group of priests. When the army arrived, the priests guarding the capital took the initiative to stop the magic formation of the city of Babylon and opened the city gates. Darius largely inherited the national policy of Cyrus. Because the empire was expanding too fast and its territory was too vast, the development of the various regions was very uneven. He still adopted the strategy of local governance, not only retaining the interests of the original nobles, but also allowing them to worship their own gods. The Potsdam Empire allowed the people of the new provinces to worship the original gods, but as a conqueror, it also required the construction of shrines for the main gods of the Potsdam Empire. This scene was a bit like the town of Duk in the past, the town where Aman lived as a child. At the same time, there were shrines for the local patron goddess Murin and the god of Igut, Horus. But the situation of the Potsdam Empire today was different from that of Duk. The Potsdam Empire was a real conqueror, and its shrines were burning all over the continent, accepting real sacrifices. The current emperor of Potsdam, Darius, was actually the incarnation of Marduk. Would this emperor kneel to his own statue during the sacrifice ceremony? If that was the case, what a ridiculous scene it would be. But in fact, this scene did not happen. In the main shrine of the Potsdam Empire, in the center of the altar was a blazing flame, not a statue of a certain god. The Bakri that Aman knew was the title of a certain god, and Marduk also had an unknown name called Paksan. But the state religion of the Potsdam Empire was called the Great Light Church, and it was worshipped by a holy flame. The god symbolized by this flame was called Mazda. The people of Potsdam worshipped the Great Light god Mazda, and the state religion was called the Great Light Church. Later generations also called it the sect of fire. Its branches spread far and wide and gradually mutated, and it was also called the sect of fire or the sect of fire. But that was a matter of a long time later. In short, Marduk was ever-changing, and no one knew that the holy flame named Mazda was also the symbol of this god. This scene reminded people of the caveman tribe that Link was in a long time ago. Those cavemen lit a flame that never went out in a large cave all year round, and they worshipped the flame that brought warmth and light as a god. It was the prototype of a primitive religion. Until the arrival of Aman, who inherited and replaced the position of the flame and became the god in their hearts. If Aman had higher achievements at that time and had a clearer purpose to become the god that people sacrificed, he could have adopted another approach and directly sent down an oracle to give guidance. Then the flame would have been deified, and its name might have been Aman, becoming the symbol of the god that brought warmth and light. Marduk may have done this in the past. Potsdam was first formed from the fusion of many primitive tribes, and it was normal for the origin of the sect of fire to have such traces. In a sense, he may have had similar experiences as Aman, but whether this was the case or not, Aman had not been able to verify. After the Potsdam Empire annexed Babylon, the divine realm of the original Mazda divine clan of the Potsdam Empire and the divine realm of the Anunnaki divine clan of the Heaven Center had merged into one, and with the submission of the Empire of Igut, it also extended into the divine realm of the Ennead divine clan. Darius then led his army westward, crossed the straits, defeated the former kingdom of Turkey to the west of Hittite, captured its capital city of Damascus, and established a new province. The kingdom of Turkey was already on the edge of the Olympian divine clan, and after Potsdam annexed it, they pressed into the united kingdom of Sidon by land and water, which was the place where the people on earth believed in the Olympian gods. The Potsdam army encountered the most tenacious resistance in history, and the repeated tug-of-war lasted for a long time. Aman did not witness Darius' great achievements on earth, and as Marduk cut off his avatar to verify the oath was close to completion, Aman also created his own vow of heaven in the immortal eternity. Faust turned into smoke and dissipated, Samir spread his wings and flew away, and Aman stepped into the immortal eternity. His figure with a faint golden light appeared in the boundless loneliness, waved his hand forward, and saw a golden river, at the end of which was a lotus of the first holding a gushing red sun. Then the river surged and swept him into the source, swallowed up by the red sun, and Aman entered the Ennead divine realm for the second time. As soon as he appeared in the divine realm, he heard Ra's voice, "Why are you only now coming?" Standing over a desert, Aman said to the lotus of the first at the source of the divine river in the distance, "Ra, when do you think I should come?" The petals opened, and Ra stood up and sighed, "I didn't expect that Marduk would actually defeat the entire Anunnaki divine clan. He attacked from the human world, and the divine realm of the Ennead is also in the process of imperceptibly merging, and Potsdam's fire is really fierce. Our original agreement was that after you had the achievements of the Creator, you would kill Seth and become the main god of the Ennead divine realm, but now..." Aman interrupted him and said, "Now I still abide by the agreement, no matter what the situation is in the Ennead divine realm." Ra actually bowed to Aman and said, "Ammonius, your aura is both familiar and unfamiliar to me, as if it contains a realm that I have not yet sought. Can you please tell me, have you seen Anu? What happened to the Anunnaki divine realm? The answer that Anu and I are seeking, can you give us some pointers?" Aman raised his hand, and a golden light imprinted itself between Ra's eyebrows. Ra stood in the heart of the flower, stunned, and the lotus of the first at his feet was gradually stained with a faint golden glow. After a while, he looked up and said, "Things on earth have exceeded my expectations. Even if the divine realm of the Ennead no longer exists, there is still this divine kingdom in the eternal and inextinguishable. This is my promise as the God of creation. Now that I want to make the same choice as Anu, can I ask you to replace me and integrate it into your divine realm? Aman replied, I had expected you to make such a request. If the divine realm of the Ennead is no longer there, or even if the empire of Igut disappears, I don't care if I replace Seth as the main god, but you want me to replace you in fulfilling the promise of the God of creation and pursue another realm of transcendence? Ra showed a very faint smile. Like Anu, I have reached the end of my path to become such a god of creation. I can only let go of the end of my desire to transcend the mortal world, but to let go, I can only ask for your help. Aman asked again, do you know what you will face? It may be the same fate as Isis. Ra shook his head, I don't know, but I will seek confirmation, and the vow in my heart has been made. Aman nodded lightly, well, I agree to your request. But to integrate this divine realm, I must first create my divine realm. And to create my divine realm, I must complete the unfulfilled vow. This is not a matter between you and me, but also requires the gods of the Ennead to be willing to accept my guidance and become angels in the divine realm. If I don't kill Seth, there is no way to talk about it. Ra waved his hand and said, go, this is between you and Seth, the gods of the Ennead will not intervene. The mountains and rivers in front of him swirled away and turned into the shape of a lotus flower, and Aman stood outside the divine realm again, looking at the outline of the divine realm. On one petal of the lotus of the beginning, there was a dew-like light, and the dewdrop reflected a scene of heaven and earth, which was the world created by Seth, the creator, and belonged only to him. Seth was hiding in that dewdrop-like world, which was attached to and integrated with the divine realm of the Ennead. Others could not enter, but Ra could cast a spell to make it appear. If Aman wanted to kill Seth and Seth did not fight, he could only attack from the outside and destroy the world. Aman stood in the void and raised his arm, and the golden light in his palm turned into a silver glow, which extended into the shape of the Blade of Order. This was a transformation of Aman's great magical power out of nothing. It had the same power and use as the Blade of Order. With the Blade of Order in his hand, Aman condensed all his magical power and flew it out. After the silver glow flew out, it rapidly shrank and eventually fell on the dewdrop and disappeared. A crack appeared on the dewdrop, and there was a faint sound of a landslide, and the petals of the lotus flower trembled slightly. What Aman used at the moment was no longer a mortal technique. Chapter 289. Aman, who was outside the divine kingdom of Ennead, suddenly heard a terrified roar, Aman. How can you do it? Following the voice, a ray of light flew out of the crack in the dewdrop and fled into eternity, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Aman replied coldly, my achievements have surpassed the Creator, and I have the means to cut open your world, so I came to find you. As he spoke, he turned into a golden light and shot through the void that Seth had fled to. The main body of the world created by Seth, who already had the achievement of the Creator, was a tall and majestic mountain, on top of which stood his palace, surrounded by undulating mountains. He was hiding in that palace, and no one outside this world knew what he was doing. Seth knew that sooner or later Aman would seek revenge on him, and he was safe and undisturbed by hiding in this world. But as the main god of the Ennead, it was impossible for him to never show up and disappear from his own world, and in the eyes of others, what was the difference between this and not existing? So he was preparing to fight Aman, but he still felt that he was not ready. As the main god of the Ennead, the head of the angels of the Ennead, and the guardian of the empire of Igut, Seth did not pay attention to the empire of Igut at all when it surrendered to Potts, nor did he listen to any calls, and devoted himself to cultivating his magic power and forging magic items. The members of the Ennead were not only the gods of the divine kingdom, but also the divine emissaries of the divine realm. Potts conquered Igut, and temples dedicated to the sacred fire of great light were also built all over Igut. Although in the short term, it had no substantial impact on the divine power source of the Ennead, in the long term, it was almost a devastating impact. In the eyes of ordinary people, the failure of Igut was the failure of the Ennead gods, and the submission of Pharaoh symbolized the submission of the Ennead gods to the Lord of Pots, Mazda. The reasons why the people of Igut were unwilling to sincerely offer sacrifices to the great god of light were complicated. For example, many people believed that the gods had abandoned the pharaoh and no longer protected Igut, but they still prayed devoutly to the gods of the Ennead, trying to call upon the gods to protect Igut again and give the people courage and hope. The belief or concept of these people was that the gods did not only belong to the pharaoh, but to everyone who received the guidance of glory. There was also another group of people who were unwilling to offer sacrifices to the gods of pots. They needed a sense of self-identity because they were people of Igut and not people of pots, so they expressed it through religious beliefs or some kind of cultural identity. Although Igut surrendered to pots, they were not willing to surrender in their hearts. But in any case, if the rule of the Pots Empire over Igut continued for a long time and gradually integrated and divided the country, the Ennead gods would gradually lose their divine power source domain in a slow but irreversible way. The guidance received by the divine emissaries and the cultivation of their soul power were directly related to the divine power source domain, so how could they not be worried? In this case, Seth needed to come out and either give countermeasures or new guidance. This was the responsibility of the main god, but Seth did nothing but hide in his own world to prepare for Amon's revenge. Only when Ennead fully showed the outline of the Ennead to Amon could Amon find the world where Seth was hiding. Only when Amon had the achievements of the Creator could he have the means to cut open Seth's world. Otherwise, Seth would be safe, no one could disturb him, and he could hide for as long as he wanted. But Seth knew in his heart that Amon had become a fear and an obstacle in his heart, and the only way to completely cut this obstacle was to leave this world and find Amon to fight and behead Amon. Seth might have had a chance, and had had a lot of chances. Thinking back to when Amon challenged him, he was only at the 9th level of mastering the power of origin. But Seth was seriously injured at the time, and did not want to fight Amon to the death, so he chose to avoid meeting. When Amon passed the Judgment of Fate and Judgment of Armageddon, he was also seriously injured. Seth wanted to take advantage of the situation and ran to the Nile River to wait. Enlil also came. They did not know that Artemis had intervened and allowed Amon to heal his injuries in the eternal state, and then Murin used an incredible method to directly summon Amon away. In the time that followed, as Seth's injuries were completely healed, he actually had many opportunities to find Amon to fight, and at that time he was stronger than Amon. But Seth always wanted to prepare a little more securely, and it would not be too late to face Amon. Anyway, it was absolutely safe in the Creator's world. On this day, Seth was in the divine palace refining his harpoon with great magic power. Suddenly, the world outside the divine palace shook, and a silver light cut through the sky and fell from the sky, striking the tall and majestic mountain. A terrifying crack appeared on the huge mountain, rapidly spreading up to the foundation of the divine palace, and the divine palace where Seth was hiding was also split in half. How could this happen? The panicked Seth could only think of one possibility in an instant: Amon was coming. But how did he do it, and by what means did he split a crack in this world? And Anya actually allowed Amon to do so. There was no time to think so much in such a hurry. Seth turned into a cold light and flew away. He wanted to escape this world that might collapse and the divine kingdom of Ennead, and melt into the eternal state, forgetting time and space, so that Amon could not find him. As for how long it would take for him to return, and what would the human world and divine kingdom look like by then, Seth had no time to think about it. But Seth forgot one thing: his identity was the main god of the Decagon divine clan, and he received the guidance of Anya, the god of creation. His soul carried the mark of the divine kingdom of Ennead, and Anya could sense his existence and find him. In fact, even if Anya did not help, the moment Seth turned into a cold light and flew away from the lotus of the absolute beginning, Amon had already locked onto him. Seth escaped his world and the divine kingdom of Ennead, and just as he was about to melt his body and soul into the eternal state, suddenly there was a burst of light and his figure was fully revealed, appearing in the familiar world of heaven and earth. Under the blue sky, there were thousands of miles of yellow sand, and the sun could not be seen, but it was daytime. There was no wind around, and the silent sand dunes stretched on endlessly. Seth was flying in the air, but no matter how he flew, there was still an endless desert. He suddenly realized that this was not the human world, but a strange divine kingdom. He immediately stopped his body and took out his staff in an attempt to break free of this world. Golden light shot out from the horizon on all sides, surrounding the heavens and the earth like a curtain, preventing him from rushing out of this divine kingdom. Turning around again, Seth finally saw the master of this world. A young man in a gray-white linen robe, barefoot and empty-handed, was walking towards him in the desert. Although Amon had known Seth for a long time, and Seth could recognize Amon, this was the first time the two really met. Amon looked up at Seth in the air with his hands behind his back and said coldly, "God of war and desert of the Ennead, we finally meet. How many nights have I thought about how to cut you down with my own hands? I didn't expect that when we met, you would be in my world." Seth's expression could no longer be described as horror, and his hand holding the staff was trembling as he exclaimed, your world, how is this possible?" "Yes, how is this possible?" Amon turned into a golden light in the immortal eternity and locked onto Seth, and instantly created a world, unfolding the endless desert under the blue sky to contain Seth. This was something only a god of creation could do. Amon's expression did not change. "Yes, I have surpassed the achievements of the god of creation, this is my divine kingdom, or rather, the beginning of the divine kingdom." Speaking of this, the corners of his mouth curled, and he said in a contemptuous tone, "Seth, to think that you are a god, what kind of medicine did you take, attacking me with elemental magic here?" While Seth spoke, he had already used his magic to launch an attack. A god like Seth, in a sense, was very traditional in his habits. Before transcending eternal life, the most powerful means that he had mastered in the human world were nothing more than various high-level magic, among which the most effective instantaneous casting was of course the elemental magic, so he subconsciously launched it. Unfortunately, there was no scene of sand rolling into countless flying arrows, wind blades whirling, and flames flying. He was the god of the desert in the Ennead divine clan, and he was best at sand flying, but not a single grain of sand in this desert was summoned by him, and there was no wind in the air. Seth used the wrong method to attack, but there was no response at all. Only then did he completely confirm one thing: this was the world created by Amon, and he could not summon elemental power to perform magic like in the human world. Seth pointed his staff at Amon, who was approaching, and shouted in a trembling voice, "How did you do it?" "Amon, I did it this way. Here, if you want to fight me, you can only use the great magic that your body possesses." Seth shouted, and with a roll of his black robe, he turned into a cloud of smoke, and countless changing tentacles flew out of the smoke, like formless but tangible strange snakes. They whizzed towards Amon, wrapping him up from all directions. The smoke looked light and did not seem to be able to hurt people, but there was a huge poison in the black smoke that could erode the body and soul, and when it got close to Amon's body, a cold light suddenly flashed at the end of each smoke, condensing into sharp fangs. This was the attack that Seth was best at. If he was facing an ordinary enemy, the opponent's weapon could not block the smoke, but the smoke would turn into a solid attack again and again, and he was simply invincible. Amon suddenly turned around, the golden light in his hand turned into a sharp sword, and he swung the sword in place, circling left and right, constantly hitting every flying smoke. This strange sword light did not pass through the smoke and came out, as if there was a sealing force. It dispersed the smoke again and again. Then the smoke condensed again and turned into a strange snake again. The two gods were fighting. Amon only defended and did not attack. The sword in his hand was just like the eye of the seal that appeared out of thin air. In addition to dispersing the strange smoke, Amon did not use any other means, he was just dancing with the sword. When Amon was a child, he only knew how to use a mine hammer and not a sword. His first teacher, Nietzsche, was a great magician, but he was also not good at martial arts. Later, when Amon went to the cavemen tribe, he learned many martial arts from Madanzo, but Amon's weapon was an iron staff, not a sword. His fighting skills were unique, mainly developed by himself when hunting with the cavemen. He only paid attention to conciseness and effectiveness. Later, Aman went to Montefiore and became the guard captain of the Temple of Isis archives. He had the opportunity to come into contact with well-trained elite warriors and various martial arts classics, and he could also practice his fighting skills. Later, Aman became the commander of a legion, personally participated in military drills, and went through a series of battles. When he returned to Igut, he could already be called a master swordsman. At this moment, watching Aman's sword dance, although it was not as graceful as a woman's performance, it was mighty and vigorous, full of power and beauty. He waved his sword on the yellow sand, his body moving, his feet circling. Every sword was so accurate and powerful, precisely dispersing each of Seth's attacks. His expression was focused, and there was sincerity in his concentration, as if he was drawing his sword and dancing, not fighting with Seth. Seth displayed the art of transformation he was best at, surrounding Aman and attacking him like a storm for a long time. Aman just did not change, the sword light sprinkled around his body like rain, but he did not fight back at all. Seth's attacks were ineffective, but he suddenly realized something. Aman did not hurt him at all, but there was only one result of fighting like this. When one side's magical power was exhausted, he could only let the other side kill him. The sword in Aman's hand was very strange. It had a kind of sealing power that only dissolved Seth's attack. Seth, on the other hand, used up a lot more magic power than Aman when he used all his strength to attack. Even if he came out unscathed, he would still suffer a big loss in the end. In the end, he would not be able to escape, and if Aman wanted to cut him down, he only needed a light blow. Seth, who was alert, gave Aman a series of the most vicious curses in his heart. The so-called gods who transcended eternal life were not necessarily good people in the simple sense. For example, Seth was not a good person, but at this moment, in Seth's view, Aman was simply the most vicious, despicable, and insidious god in the world. He scolded, "Aman, do you not dare to fight me to your heart's content? You tried to cut me down, but do not want to use your power, afraid of the consequences of your actions, and use such a cowardly method to fight with me?" Aman, wrapped in black smoke, asked indifferently, "Between you and me, who is the coward?" When a person has a guilty conscience, the most afraid of how others curse him, he often attacks others in the same way. For example, a coward always accuses others of not having courage, a thief always asks others if they deserve that wealth. Poor you, a god, are the same. You want to kill me, but resent me for not being killed in the way you want me to? Ridiculous. Seth roared, and the thick smoke that wrapped around Aman suddenly rose and condensed, quickly turning into a huge mountain in mid-air, smashing towards Aman. The main body of the Creator's world that Seth created was a mountain, and he also used a method of creating something out of nothing, which could not be performed in the human world. This mountain was no different from a real mountain, and it even had the power to suppress the gods. Aman's figure looked so small under the mountain that fell from the sky, as small as an ant. However, in the next moment, this towering mountain shrank rapidly. Perhaps it was not the mountain that became smaller, but the world that became bigger, and the shrinking of the mountain was just a relative illusion. The mountain that fell from the sky seemed to have turned into a feather that had almost no weight, and gently floated down. When it fell in front of Aman, it looked only the size of a or. Aman sneered. "Seth, if you were to fight Anila in the divine kingdom of Eru, this method would also be ineffective. This is my world, and your mountain also has to abide by my rules. Although it is still so heavy, I can make it float." Seth was a little dumbfounded. He really did not have the experience of fighting such an opponent in this kind of environment. The mountain that he summoned was indeed heavy, but Aman could make it light here. This was not incomprehensible. For example, in the human world, everyone seemed to have a mountain pressing down on them, which was the invisible air. In this world, Aman was the ruler, making the flying mountain as light as the surrounding air, and when it fell, it lost its power. Aman took a step back, and the mountain that had turned into the size of an or fell right in front of his feet. The sword in his hand once again turned into a mining hammer, and he smashed it with the hammer. A cold light flew back into Seth's body from the shattered mountain, and Seth's attack did not have any effect. Aman held the mining hammer in his hand and said indifferently, "Seth, I have already told you, if you want to fight me here, you can only use your main body's magic power. You want to use a method to injure others, but you don't want to injure yourself. How is that possible? Just now, you were laughing at me for not wanting to bear the price of killing you, but I have been facing your attacks all this time, and what are you doing? Seth was already in a desperate situation. If he still had any misgivings, he would never be able to escape from this world. Only by cutting off the fear that he had accumulated for many years, could he fight the opponent. Otherwise, not to mention the ending of life and death, he wouldn't even have the capital to fight against Amon. In this world, Seth's only capital was the great magic power that he had cultivated for many years. His face was gloomy, and his eyes began to burn with fanatical hatred, concealing his panic and fear. He slowly pulled out a three-pronged harpoon. Amon slightly examined it, and then cursed, "Is this the weapon you refined? As the god that the people of Igut believe in, you are actually holding a harpoon in your hand." The people of Igut did not eat fish, and Amon was clear about this. It was said that the fish in the Nile River had the flesh and blood of the gods, and this legend was naturally related to Osiris. But Seth would also not tell Amon that long before Osiris established the empire of Igut, before he became a god, he was a fisherman on the Nile River, and once fought with the monsters on the Nile River with a harpoon. Because of this, he was guided by the Ennead, and later became a god who transcended eternal life. Chapter 290. If he did not use other means, Amon was inferior to Hante in at least one aspect. That was the accumulation of 1,000 years of cultivation. The iron staff in Amon's hand was not the one he gave to Moses, but a transformation of the golden light in his body and soul. But the harpoon in Seth's hand was a real divine weapon that had been refined for 1,000 years, gleaming coldly and extremely tough. The harpoon changed according to Seth's will like a snake, and the three sharp tips would rotate and extend, with the power to stab the gods. Under Seth's free and easy attacks, Amon, who had experienced countless fierce battles, could only parry and did not have the time to fight back. Seth kept attacking with the harpoon. He had made up his mind to use the great magic power that he had cultivated for 1,000 years. With a loud crack, the iron staff was broken into pieces of golden light, and one of the harpoon's tips stabbed straight at Amon's chest, while the other two extended and twisted around his neck and back. Amon roared, and instead of retreating, he moved forward. His fist was covered in a faint golden light, and a violent aura filled his body. He punched the harpoon and forced Seth back. Mine hammer. The staff was a weapon that Amon had used before. After he gave the iron staff to Moses, he often fought with his fists, but the power was unstoppable. When Seth saw that Amon had launched a violent counterattack, he also let out a strange cry and changed his form. The harpoon in his hand disappeared, the clothes on his body turned into flying ash, and a long tail swung out from behind him. The tip of the tail had a three-pronged tip, which was the transformation of the divine artifact harpoon. A pair of long horns grew out of his head as well. They were tough and sharp, but they were as flexible as tentacles. The muscles all over his body bulged, and black smoke came out of his mouth, which turned into a layer of black light armor to protect his body. The black armor was burning with poisonous flames, and he pounced at Amon. Seth's current appearance was so terrifying that if he was seen in the human world, he would be scared to death. This was his final, most powerful, and most effective method. His body and soul merged with the artifact that he had refined for many years. His great magic power turned into an armor of poisonous flame, turning the boundless hatred, anger, and burning fear into a sharp horn. On the other hand, Amon's entire body was wrapped in a layer of faint golden light, isolating him from the onslaught of the burning poisonous flames. The golden light on his fists had turned into a pair of golden gloves. Regardless of whether it was the long tail stab or the horn charge, Amon punched out head-on. There were no tricks to speak of in this tangled battle. Amon did not seem to want to use any clever tricks or traps to defeat Seth. He just wanted to determine the winner in a head-on duel with him. After a fierce battle, Seth had already used all the means he could, but Amon's response left him shocked. From the beginning to the end, it was Seth who attacked wildly, while Amon only parried, completely relying on the great magic power of his body to resist. Seth's powerful and seemingly inexhaustible power gradually weakened. Amon did not hurt him. Instead, he seemed to be showing an attitude, which was to let Seth fight to his heart's content. Gods would not die of exhaustion, but this kind of unreserved attack could only be carried out when they were unable to continue. If Amon wanted to kill Seth, it would not take much effort. Amon's strategy had not changed from the beginning. Seth felt that he could not fight like this anymore. The Amon in front of him was not someone he could defeat at all. Moreover, Seth also realized one thing. Although Amon used all kinds of means to fight with him, there was always indescribable contempt in his bones. It was like a cat playing with a mouse, but was not in a hurry to bite the opponent to death. Amon did not take this duel seriously. To Amon, this was just an opportunity to prove himself. Using the life and death struggle of a creator, Amon used all the means he had used in his life in this world. To a god, what Amon did was a silent mockery and the greatest humiliation. Seth was fighting desperately with Amon, but Amon was using this opportunity to practice and comprehend on his own. When the gloves on Amon's hands disappeared, he flipped his palm and took out an absolute beginning lotus. The red light that rose from the center of the lotus shot towards Seth's black armor. Seth finally felt despair. But Seth could no longer stop his crazy attack. As long as he stopped, his body and soul would be devoured by the red sun, and even his soul imprint would be erased. Seth mustered his remaining strength, and the long tail wrapped in black smoke suddenly turned into countless forked tail tips, stubbornly resisting the rays of the red sun. He had already planned to escape, and he would rather be heavily injured than leave this world. He wanted to hide far away, never return to the human world, and never see Amon again. But it was not that easy for Seth to escape. The absolute beginning lotus turned into a golden scroll. After dispersing the countless forked tails in the black smoke, the divine characters in the book all imprinted themselves on Seth's body, trying to trap him firmly. But then Amon's mocking voice came, "Seth, back then you gave me the name Shedden, and you had the craftsmen of Iga draw Shedden's appearance and leave it on the murals in the temples and mausoleums. Shedden's shadow in the thick fog, with a long forked tail and a pair of fierce horns, so that's your current appearance." Seth saw that the scroll of destiny had unfolded and wrapped around him. He knew that if he didn't break free, he wouldn't have another chance. He suddenly let out an earth-shattering roar. His body exploded into thick smoke, and within the smoke, there were countless cold lights shooting towards Amon. Regardless of whether this attack was effective or not, Seth wouldn't be able to recover his strength for at least a few hundred years. At the same time, his figure blurred, as if he was about to disappear from this world. At this time, Amon lightly shouted, "Seth, face your fate." The scroll of destiny suddenly disappeared, and the golden light once again blocked the thick smoke and cold lights. Countless divine characters gathered in his hand, condensing into a long sharp edge. It was the shape of the key of destiny. The key of destiny stabbed into the void, and the edge seemed to pierce through this world. Within the range of this attack, Hanti couldn't dodge. Just as he was about to dissipate, his figure condensed again. Seth brandished his harpoon to block the golden edge. The blue sky and yellow sand trembled, and the tough three tips suddenly softened, turning into three coiling vipers that spun and extended around the key of destiny. Seth gripped the handle of the harpoon and cried out sorrowfully, "Since you want to kill me, then let's die together." The three harpoons wrapped around the key of destiny, extending to their limits. Suddenly, they emitted a cold light and rapidly expanded, and the sound of crashing waves could be heard. Seth knew that he couldn't escape, and he instantly condensed 1,000 years of cultivation in an attempt to make a final struggle. He wanted to destroy this divine tool. If this divine tool was destroyed, the surging power would explode, and Seth would inevitably be reduced to ashes. Under such a huge impact, even if Amon didn't die, he would be seriously injured. Seth wanted to give up his eternal life, choosing to die together with Amon at the last moment. But how could Amon let him do that? The key of destiny exploded into golden light, and the golden light turned into two chains in the air. One locked onto the expanding harpoon, and the other tightly wrapped around Seth's figure. Amon asked softly, "Seth, do you still recognize it? What magic is this?" "It's a secret technique from the Temple of Isis, called Isis's imprisonment. I have many techniques that I learned on my own, and even learned secretly, but only this divine technique was personally taught to me by Maria. I'll give you a final choice. Do you want to accept the eternal imprisonment, or do you want to kill yourself?" Seth fell. In Amon's kingdom of heaven, there was still a vast expanse of yellow sand, and the world was silent, as if that god had never come. Only the harpoon in Amon's left hand had witnessed the duel just now. With the key of destiny in his right hand and the harpoon in his left, Amon slowly walked forward in the vast expanse of sand. His figure was like when he passed the test of endless life and death in the Saya desert, leaving a footprint behind him with every step he took, and then the sand surged to erase his footprints. He walked so silently, and when he opened his eyes again, it seemed that he had reached the end of the world. There was nothing in front of him, even time and space had disappeared without a trace, and behind him was endless desolation. This was the world opened up by Amon. Was the kingdom of heaven he vowed to be like this? At the end of the world, Ammonius turned around and threw the harpoon in his hand far away, as if throwing out the helplessness and resentment that had accumulated in his heart for many years. The harpoon flew out for an unknown distance, and disappeared into the sand dunes. Then strange dead trees appeared sparsely in the desert, and the scattered gravel between the dunes also emitted a cold light. But there was a hot and restless breath in the air, and there was thick smoke rising in the distance, as if there were flames burning deep underground. This seemed to symbolize the traces left behind from his fierce battle with Seth. Amon turned around again, holding the key of destiny in his right hand and drawing it under his feet, and another world appeared outside the end of the world. The key of destiny drew a strange boundary, and Amon stepped over it. As Amon walked, a stretch of plains and undulating hills unfolded. The plains were green like a carpet, and the flowers were like a brocade, just like the grassland that Amon walked through when he first walked out of the mountains, holding Yun Namna's hand. The surrounding hills were verdant and green, and the air was fresh and picturesque, dotted with vineyards and rose petals. In the garden, the sound of a small stream flowing between the mountains was like a beautiful melody, and the wind carried the fragrance of flowers and a faint smell of fine wine. The surroundings were peaceful and quiet. Amon continued forward, and at the other end of the wilderness appeared a towering and beautiful mountain. He stepped up the mountain, and white stone steps appeared under his feet. Climbing up the stone steps, a magnificent palace appeared halfway up the mountain, with white columns supporting a beautiful dome. Amon walked through the gate of the palace, and when he crossed the threshold, he stepped into the eternal, and left the newly created kingdom of heaven. But the magnificent palace still stood silently in the mountains, and the stream between the hills still flowed happily to the grassland. This world did not collapse because of Amon's departure. Then a silver light appeared on the boundary between the desert and the grassland, as if someone had cut a crack in the eternal, and arrived here. The silver light turned into a blonde beauty. It was Gabriel holding the blade of order. When Amon left, he sent out a summon and guidance to the human world, and this angel who had transcended eternal life finally came to the kingdom of heaven. If the rest of the disciples in the Garden of Eden could also pass the final test, they could all come here. Amon stood in the eternal, and there was only a lotus of the absolute beginning and a gushing red sun in the lonely void in front of him. Everything seemed to have not changed from before he left, but the drop of dew on the petal was gone. Amon bowed to the lotus of the absolute beginning and said, "En-Yila, Seth has fallen." En-Yila's voice sounded in his soul through the red sun. "According to the agreement, you will replace Seth as the main god of the Ennead. Please accept this mark." Amon closed his eyes as if he was accepting something, and when he reopened his eyes in the eternal, he had become the main god of the Ennead, in charge of the realm of the source of divine power. This wasn't just a simple title, but an actual possession of it. At this moment, Ammon fully understood why gods such as Enlil or Seth had to compete for such a position. It might be a little funny, but Ammon's achievements had surpassed the gods of creation of the pantheon, and there was no need to covet the position of the main god. Just like a person who had the best wine in the world in his cellar, there was no need to covet the unclean wine in the roadside tavern, but there was no harm in tasting it. Ammon already had his own realm of the source of divine power. The people of Leng city worshipped him and Murin. But he had never been the main god of a pantheon, and there were still some subtle differences between the two. The main god needed the imprint of the god of creation, and no matter which god the people in the divine realm prayed to, the main god could hear them. If he was willing to pay attention, he could feel all the believers of this pantheon pouring out their hearts to the gods. The sincere thoughts of countless people converged into a seemingly endless power that could repair one's soul. This was very useful for a level 9 divine emissary, and it was even more wonderful for a main god. The first time Ammon came into contact with this power was in Bastet's experience, and now that he had become the main god of the pantheon, he could truly feel its power. The main god could tell which god people were praying to, and under normal circumstances, he could draw the most power from the source of divine power. So what kind of power did the main god draw from? The main thing was that when the power of the soul was damaged, it could be continuously replenished. As for how fast the recovery was, it depended on how vast the divine realm was and how sincere the believers were in the belief of the gods. But this power could not make the magic power of the gods stronger, nor could it make the realm of the gods higher. The limit still depended on the cultivation of the gods themselves. As the main god of the Ennead, when Seth dueled with Ammon, even if he was no match for him, he could have held on for a longer time. Unfortunately, this main god was not very competent, or did not obtain the corresponding achievements from the position of the main god at all. The reason was very simple. Most of the people of Igut had abandoned this god in their faith and no longer prayed to Seth and prayed for blessings. In the early years, when Ammon cut down the statues of Seth in the main shrines of more than a dozen cities, Seth did not stop him. His position in the hearts of the people of Igut had collapsed along with those statues. Later, when Pot's army came on an expedition, Igut obeyed, but Seth, as the guardian god of the empire, was silent. Even the priests who represented the gods on earth no longer prayed to him sincerely. All of this started because of Ammon, and Seth's hatred and fear of Ammon could be imagined, but all of this had dissipated with Seth's fall. Ammon bowed to the lotus of the Absolute beginning again, and the red sun gradually turned into a human form, and Anila appeared in front of Ammon. The last time he saw him in the divine kingdom, he still had the appearance of a teenager, but now he had become an old man, and his figure and face were impressively another Ammon. Ammon looked at Anila, who looked like himself, narrowed his eyes and asked, "Why did you become like this, god of creation?" Anila smiled slightly and said, "The vow has been made, and the state of mind is dictated. Do you still remember the rank of generalissimo you received in Egypt?" "Inherit the glory of Anila, yes. And in fact, now I am asking you to merge with the divine kingdom of Ennead." From that moment on, the Anila that the people of Igut believe in will no longer be me, but you. But you are not only Anila, you are still Ammon. Ammon sighed softly. In the eyes of others, you are giving up everything you have, but in your vow, you may have waited a long time for this day. Unfortunately, I can't immediately replace you and integrate the divine kingdom of Ennead into my divine kingdom, which requires the gods of Ennead to be willing to accept my guidance. Although Seth has fallen, there is still one god who is unwilling. Anila nodded. "Do you mean Osiris? What do you want to do? He is even unwilling to come to the divine kingdom, only seeking the realm of the creator in the underworld, and I can't persuade him." Ammon showed a wry smile. "Whether it is intentional or not, I have long expected this. I promised Artemis of the Olympian divine clan that after I become the lord of Ennead, I will go with her to the underworld of Osiris. I have no grudge with Osiris, and of course I will not kill him like I did with Seth. I am just solving the problem. Anila, if I want to make a vow to go, I have to wait until you return from the underworld." Ammon, "Yes, you have waited long enough, you might as well wait a little longer." Anila thought for a moment, then said in a reminding tone, "You are already the Lord of Ennead, but whether or not you can obtain the corresponding status of the Lord of Ennead still depends on the choice of the people of Igut, which determines how much power you can draw from the divine realm." The last Lord of Ennead, Seth, was very unsuccessful, and in fact, he had already lost to you as early as that year. When Ammon became the Lord of Ennead, he could hear the prayers of all the people in the divine realm to the gods of Ennead, and he could also tell which god had absorbed how much soul power. As the Lord of Ennead, he also had the right to issue an oracle on behalf of the divine clan, guiding the faith and sacrifices of the people. In theory, he could naturally absorb the power of all the prayers and blessings in the divine realm, and he also had the most convenient conditions to control the entire divine realm. But Anila's reminder was right, the people offered sacrifices and prayers to the gods for various reasons, but whether they really had such beliefs in their hearts or not, in fact, depended on the guidance given by the gods and the people's own choices. On the other hand, the Lord of Igut was still Anila, and the patron of the king was still Seth. This was the most important part of Merneptah's political reform, and it was a national policy that could not be subverted, otherwise the status of the pharaoh would be questioned. Ammon had accepted the imprint of the Ennead, but how to deal with this matter on earth was still a problem. Chapter 291. 272. Allah is also the name of Ammon. Ammon smiled and replied, "Thank you for your reminder. I came from the human world and have comprehended the power of origin on my own, transcending eternal life. Of course, I understand that human affairs still have to be solved by human means. Now that Igut is in turmoil, I accept your name and your true language, and ask you to send an oracle to the main shrine of Igut and the various cities. The rest, I will guide the disciples of the human world and the people of Igut to deal with. In addition to Seth, there is one more person I will not let go, and that is Pharaoh Merneptah. But I will not kill him myself. As an emperor, let him face the fate of an emperor." Allah showed a look of relief. "I almost forgot, it is not that you do not know the means of the human world. There are some things you have not done, but that does not mean you will not do them. Then I will wait for your arrival in the divine kingdom of Eru, and when we meet again will be the time to say goodbye." Ammon's creation of heaven and the killing of Seth occurred at the same time as the civil strife of the Pot's empire. At the time of Seth's fall, shortly after the accidental death of Cambyses, the son of Cyrus, the high priest of the Pot's empire, Gomter, usurped the throne. Darius was still holding back and watching, and the civil strife of the Pot's empire had just reached its climax. As soon as Igut surrendered to the Pot's empire, it was freed from the real control of the Pot's empire. From Pharaoh to the ministers, all breathed a sigh of relief. Cyrus died at the right time, and the Pot's empire, which was in civil strife, had no time to pay attention to the affairs of Igut in the distance. Pharaoh Merneptah even regretted it. If he had known this would happen, why did he do it in the first place? He cancelled the imperial title himself and ran to the border to kneel to Cambyses to show his allegiance. Igut became a vassal state of Pot's, and the crisis passed in the blink of an eye. Merneptah also wanted to take the opportunity to go back on his word and restore the imperial title, so that Igut would no longer be nominally a vassal state. A cautious minister advised him that state affairs should not be taken lightly, and promises made should not be broken without reason. Moreover, although the Pot's empire was in chaos, it had not yet declined. If it recovered, wouldn't Igut be destroying itself by doing this? Anyway, the current surrender was only in name, and Igut was actually still outside the control of the Pot's empire. There was no way to pay tribute for the time being, so it was better to wait and see how the situation would change. If the internal strife in the Baz empire did not end there, that would be the best. Anyway, maintaining the status quo would not do any harm to Egypt, so it was better to avoid trouble. Therefore, Egypt was still nominally subservient to Pot's, but in reality, it had already broken away from Pot's control. For the time being, Egypt did not pay tribute to Pot's, nor did it build a shrine to worship the Church of Light in its territory. The statues of the gods of the statues of the gods. By Seth, the gods of the gods of the shrines of the empire, of the gods. When the gods fell, would the statues of the gods would the gods. And that was not necessarily the case. When Marduk beheaded Enlil, the statues of Enlil in the shrines of Hittite and Assyria were safe and sound, and only a master like Faust could sense the subtle changes. When Ammon beheaded Adado, only one statue collapsed, and that was the statue of Adado in the shrine of Enlil, while the statues of Adado in the other cities were still intact. There were many things that gods could do, but not all of them needed to be done, as it would not prove anything and would be meaningless. For example, Ammon could have chewed a stone like eating bread, but why would he? In order to make a statue collapse while beheading a god, two conditions must be met. One was not stingy with the use of great magic, and the other was that the statue had an avatar of the god attached to it. Ammon naturally hated Seth to the extreme, and he did not hesitate to use great magic to shatter all the statues attached to Seth's avatar in the world. This was undoubtedly another major earthquake for Igut, and urgent reports flew to the capital to report to Pharaoh and the high priests, and many people were in a state of shock. This kind of thing had happened before, and back then, the statues of Seth in the main shrines of the 14 cities of Igut were shattered by a single sword strike. But at that time, someone had destroyed the statues, and Pharaoh and the elders of the Academy of Magic of Igut knew that it was Ammon who did it, but the name of the assassin announced to the public was Satan. The collapse of Seth's position in the hearts of the people began at that time, and some even privately speculated that the person who destroyed the statue of Seth was actually Ammon. But now that almost all the statues of Seth in Igut had collapsed at the same time, this could no longer be explained with common sense, and could only be regarded as a miracle. To explain it in good faith, it could be said that Seth had abandoned all those who believed in him in Igut, and had since left, no longer giving guidance and shelter. To speculate maliciously, it was naturally Seth's fall. Whether it was good faith or bad faith, these speculations were no longer meaningful to the fallen Seth himself, but they were of great significance to others. How would Igut face and resolve this change? Pharaoh Merneptah absolutely had to maintain Seth's position because he had no way out. The glory and authority of this pharaoh was tied to Seth, and the title, Merneptah, was not a joke. It represented the legitimacy of his monarchical status. On the third day after the change, the urgent reports from the various cities had not yet been fully delivered. Without any oracle guidance, Merneptah urgently issued the latest decree after consultation with his confidants and announced it to the whole country. The collapse of the statues of the great archangel Seth in the various cities is the archangel's expression of anger and dissatisfaction. Since the implementation of the new reforms, many people have lost their pious worship of the gods, and their faith has been tempted by the demons, causing them to lack sincere sacrifices and pious prayers. Therefore, the gods have sent down punishment, and the empire of Igut has also suffered a test of danger. In order to appease the wrath of the gods, skilled craftsmen must be urgently summoned from all places to build more magnificent and exquisite statues for Archangel Seth in the shortest time possible at all costs, and the grandest ceremony must be held to offer sacrifices to the Archangel. Everyone must pray and repent with the most pious faith, or they will be punished by the gods and the angels. Pharaoh's order was officially issued, and the various cities had to comply, but the people were full of complaints. The priests who had held real power since the era of Horus actually did not have a good impression of Seth, the archangel, and understood that all of this was just a means by which Pharaoh implemented the new reforms. And in the beliefs of most of the people, they had long since abandoned their reverence for Seth. If they were to call upon a god, many people would rather choose Ammon. The construction of the new capital was a huge project that had not been completed for so many years. Not only were craftsmen and laborers from all over the country conscripted, but there were also countless slaves working in the new capital. Moreover, half of Igut's revenue was consumed on this matter. Now that so many statues of Seth had to be built in such a short period of time, and the requirements were extremely strict, it was also a heavy burden on the various cities. Not to mention the ordinary people, even the nobles had some complaints. But even if there were complaints, they had to be carried out. Unless they wanted to rebel and overthrow Merneptah, they had to build more magnificent and exquisite statues for Seth. Seth had fallen, and the statues had collapsed. Could they still be rebuilt? Of course, But those statues no longer had Seth's incarnation as sustenance, and they were just cold stones. Igut could build as many statues as he wanted, and if Pharaoh wanted, he could even order a pig to be sacrificed on the altar. It all depended on whether the people of Igut agreed or not. Merneptah thought that he had responded quickly and made the right choice at the right time, but his heart was also uneasy. He also came to the shrine to pray day and night, and although he knew that the hope was slim, he still tried to hear Seth's voice for guidance. As for the rest of the empire, whether it was the elders of the Igut Academy of Magic or the nobles of the various cities, they all had doubts in their hearts, and they also prayed to the gods, hoping to receive guidance from the oracle to figure out what was going on. Just as Pharaoh's urgent order was delivered to the various cities, the oracle finally came, which was a hard slap to Merneptah's face. In their souls, the priests heard the voice of Ra, the Lord God. The evil god Seth, who plotted to murder Osiris and steal the position of Igut, failed. 1,000 years later, he took advantage of the Uruk legion's pressure to force Horus to retreat and deceive the people of Igut for sacrifice, and now he has been beheaded by Ammonius. Back then, the supreme general of the empire, Ammon, walked on earth and achieved the achievements of the gods, and was already the lord of the Ennead. From today onwards, my glory and title belong to Ammon, and Ra is the name of Ammon. The oracle was shocking and puzzling, and the priests, of course, did not know what had happened in the divine realm, so they could only guess according to their own understanding. Most people had a feeling of sudden realization that Ammon was Ra who had descended to earth, and if that was the case, many things could be explained. People then speculated that while Ra was walking on earth as Ammon, Seth in the divine realm had taken the opportunity to do a lot of bad things, and now that Ammonius had returned to heaven, he had punished Seth, which led to today's change. This speculation was reasonable, and even if most people could not be sure, they would rather believe that this was the case, as it was all in line with their wishes. There was no need to elaborate on the shock that Ra's latest oracle had caused in the upper echelons of Igut. The one who was most frightened was Pharaoh Merneptah, as the oracle was tantamount to questioning the legitimacy of Pharaoh's succession and denying his authority to continue to rule Igut. For the first time in his life, the pharaoh made a decision to go against the gods. He urgently ordered the city lord and the chief priest not to reveal the contents of the oracle and to destroy all records related to the oracle. If it was a problem that could be solved by a secret order, then it was never a problem. If it had been in the era of Lazith II, Pharaoh's authority might have temporarily suppressed the matter, but now that the people of Igut were in turmoil, Merneptah could no longer control the situation. Ra changed the situation in Igut with just one oracle, and as for Ammon himself, he did nothing but send 2 messengers. The first city to announce Ra's oracle and not carry out Pharaoh's latest order was the Cape States, which was beyond most people's expectations. Rod Drick, the Lord of Cape, was a veteran of officialdom. He handled almost everything well and had never caused any trouble for himself. But this time, he stepped forward bravely. This wasn't his usual style of doing things, was it? Rod Dick's decision was related to the arrival of 2 guests. On the day of Ra's oracle, 2 guests came to visit from afar, Madanzo and George, who had not been seen for many years. The identities of these 2 men were very subtle. Madanzo was the captain of Supreme General Ammon's guards back then, and later followed Ammon to the city of Salem, where he defeated a strong enemy in battle and established a city on the plains of Duk. George, on the other hand, was once the chief priest of the Nra Legion, and later received a secret order to hunt down Ammon. After leaving Igut, he instead followed Ammon, becoming the chief priest of the city of Salem and the head of the Salem Legion, establishing remarkable achievements. The 2 of them had the guts to come back and pay a visit to City Lord Rod Drick in public. But it needs to be said that it had been more than 20 years since Ammon killed Lazith II's eldest son, Prince Snek, and crossed the border and left Igut. Back then, the god Seth sent the Lion King Yugalu to leave the divine realm of Ennead to fight Ammon in the Saya Desert. Pharaoh on earth also sent the supreme warrior Gabriel and the supreme mage George to secretly rush to the plains of Duk to hunt down Ammon. Neither of these 2 matters was successful, and neither was made public. There was no official record in the official literature of Egypt, and it was only vaguely mentioned that Supreme General Aman left the border to go to his fief on the plains of Duk. The Empire of Igut never officially convicted Aman, and the area around the city of Salem was also the territory that Lazith II had conferred to Aman back then, and Aman did not violate any law by going there. As for the fact that he killed Prince Snek in front of the army, all the soldiers present could testify that it was Prince Snek who called the Supreme General back, and then ordered the bow and arrows to be fired, and that His Highness the Prince had attempted to kill the Supreme General first. So these things could not be discussed openly, and Pharaoh and the officials deliberately stopped bringing them up, and everything came to an end with the passage of time. Aman built the city of Salem on the plains of Duk, guided the people to repel the invasion of the powerful Assyrian Empire, and was already worshipped as a god. His legend spread on the continent, and he was even deeply worshipped by the people of Igut. George was once one of the 3 high priests of the Temple of Isis, and later became the chief priest of the city of Salem and the head of the Salem Legion. But the Empire of Igut did not punish him, and only appointed another high priest to settle the matter. At that time, the Temple of Isis had become the Temple of Seth, and many ordinary people thought that George had been sent to the city of Salem by the Empire of Igut to be the chief priest. As for Madanzo, he was even more innocent. He was originally a warrior of Babylon and the captain of the Supreme General's guards, so of course he had to follow Aman. When the two of them returned more than 20 years later, although their identities were awkward, they were not guilty of any crime. The two of them did not sneak into Igut quietly, but Madanzo drove a carriage, and George sat in the carriage, which was in broad daylight, along the main road to the border checkpoint, and showed their identities to be interrogated. The arrival of the two men caused the entire garrison guarding the border checkpoint to boil, and of course they did not take up their weapons to stand guard, but rushed out of the barracks to the main road to kneel and salute. The commander of this border checkpoint personally led the horse and carriage and welcomed Madanzo and George into the territory, as if welcoming a god. The NRA Legion was still stationed at the border of the Cape States, and the head of the Legion was still the Lord of Cape, Rod Dick, and the chief priest was the Supreme Mage Ibn. More than 20 years had passed, and the soldiers who had followed Aman were no longer young, and the soldiers who served had changed several times. But an army had its own spiritual traditions, and the veterans would tell the new recruits about the past, the achievements of the army and the glory it had inherited. Aman, George, John, and Madanzo were the founders of the NRA Legion, and their stories had long become legends on the road, and they were the pride of the NRA Legion. The generals and soldiers came to see the legendary hero with worship in their hearts. Some of the veterans were still in the NRA Legion, and those who were able to stay to the present were more or less promoted. Because of their military achievements and experience over the years, they were now all officers of various ranks. For example, the commander of the border checkpoint was only 18 years old, and he was an ordinary soldier under John's command. Now he was in his early 40s and was a commander of 100 paces. In the ranks of the army, he had become a noble general of the lowest rank. These generals were born as civilian warriors, and they had made meritorious contributions on the battlefield. They paid no attention to the intrigue and shameful past of the imperial officialdom more than 20 years ago. They welcomed the arrival of Madanzo and George as if they were gods, and sent soldiers on horseback to the next checkpoint along the official road to deliver the message. Madanzo and George traveled for 300 miles from the border to the main city of Cape States. Along the way, the soldiers of the NRA Legion came to greet and escort them. Those who didn't know the situation would have thought that the emperor had come to inspect the border. Rod Dick, of course, had received information in Cape that these two troublesome, big shots had arrived. The soldiers of the NRA Legion did not stop drinking and feasting along the way. The generals all rode on horseback to greet them, and the momentum could only be described as magnificent. Rod Dick secretly complained in his heart. Rod Dick was an excellent politician. He knew in his heart how to receive these two talents. Since the Empire of Igut had never convicted Madanzo and George, they couldn't openly make things difficult for them. Moreover, they had such a high reputation, so they couldn't afford to offend them. They needed to be treated well. However, they should eat, drink, and give gifts. No amount of enthusiasm could be too much, but they must not be too ostentatious. If they made such a big move in public, they would embarrass the higher-ups of the kingdom of Igut, especially His Majesty Pharaoh. Unfortunately, those uncouth men who had been in the army for decades didn't pay attention to the ways of the officialdom, which gave Rod-dik a headache. If he had known that these two people were coming, he would have greeted them. Unfortunately, he didn't know beforehand. Now it was too late to dissuade the generals, so he simply pretended to be deaf and dumb. Chapter 292. Rod-dik had received an oracle from Anare, and he was very eager to ask Madanzo and George for advice, and even more eager to hear the voice of the god Amon himself. But on the other hand, he had also received the latest order from Pharaoh, which was to still build a beautiful and magnificent statue for Seth, and to destroy the records of Anare's oracle and never allow them to be made public. So Rod-dik did not leave the city to meet George and Madanzo, and pretended to know nothing on the surface. He knew very well that these two guests would come to see him, and he would receive them warmly when the time came. He wanted to set up the most exquisite banquet, but not in the governor's office or the city's shrine, but in his own private house to entertain his old friends in a private capacity. The behavior of the legion generals gave Rod-dik a headache, but the governor did not expect that there was an even more troublesome thing waiting for him. The more he wanted to pretend to be deaf and dumb, the bigger the movement of Madanzo and George. When the two entered the city, they were actually accompanied by the shrine of Cape and the chief priest of the Anare Legion, Ibn. Many people ran out of the city to see the excitement and to welcome them. After George and Madanzo entered the city, they were welcomed by the people on both sides of the street, accompanied by the supreme mage Ibn, the senior generals of the Anare Legion, and the officials and nobles of the Cape States, and went directly to the door of Rod-dik's mansion. Rod-dik had long known that the two distinguished guests were going to enter the city today, so he deliberately did not go to the government office, but set up a banquet at home. He did not expect that there would be so many generals and officials accompanying George and Madanzo. A very important reason why all the lords came to join in the fun was the appearance of the chief priest, Ibn. The distinguished supreme mage Ibn had been in charge of the Cape States for 20 years, and his status and reputation were no less than that of the governor of the city. Ibn went 150 kilometers out of the city and met George and Madanzo at the southern end of the Red Sea where the Kemet defensive line used to be. As the chief priest of the Shrine of Cape and the Anila army, Ibn had no selfless relationship with Amon and the others back then. Why would he do this? Perhaps the reason was simple. First, he was a priest and a supreme mage who had achieved the highest level of achievement. Ever since he was a child, he had a very sincere and firm belief in the gods. After awakening the power bestowed by the gods, he became a supreme mage before the age of 30. He may not be comparable to the rare geniuses like Maria or Amon, but his achievements were still very amazing. He was a standard priest in the traditional sense. His faith in the gods had never wavered. When Merneptah implemented the reform of monotheism, Ibn had been confused, but he was also relieved. He understood Pharaoh's intentions and thought that mortals might not be able to interfere with what happened to the gods. But later, the appearance of Amon made him even more confused, and the process of seeking an answer in his heart may have taken 20 years. Amon had slashed the statue of Seth in the shrine of Cape in front of Ibn, then smashed through the dome of the shrine and flew away with Gabriel's help. Ibn knew that the man was Amon. Looking at the look in Rod-dik's eyes, he had clearly recognized who the assassin was. But later, the order issued by Pharaoh was obviously tampering with the oracle, claiming that the man's name was Sudan. Amon smashed the statues of Seth in the shrines of 14 cities in a row, but the archangel that the kingdom believed in remained silent. Since then, Seth seemed to have completely disappeared. Whenever Ibn presided over the sacrificial ceremony or prayed alone in the shrine, he kept asking himself in his heart, who gave him power, what was guiding him, and who was the god he worshipped in front of the altar every day. As the chief priest, he represented the people in the city to offer sacrifices to the gods, and on behalf of the gods to convey oracles to the people. But was that God really the God he truly believed in? Sometimes when he appeared in public sacrificial ceremonies, he even felt like a clown in a play. With such a thought in his heart, it was reasonable to say that he should not continue to receive the power bestowed by the gods, and Ibn had indeed lost his power. This made him feel fear and even despair, thinking that the gods had abandoned him or were punishing him. This situation troubled Ibn for nearly 10 years, and because there was no war, no one could see that the chief priest could no longer use magic. Finally, one day, when Ibn was able to accept the situation calmly, admit that he did not believe in Seth in his heart, and no longer prayed to Seth, and was about to resign from the empire of Igut, he found that his power had miraculously been restored, and he had become an 8th-level supreme mage. Ibn, however, fell into deeper thinking, and many questions were buried deep in his heart. Until one recent day, the confusion that had plagued him for many years seemed to have disappeared, because he heard the oracle of Allah. This supreme mage's understanding of the oracle was not much different from that of others. It turned out that Aman was Allah who descended to earth, and Seth took advantage of Allah's absence to cause trouble in heaven. When Aman returned from earth to heaven and beheaded Seth, all the puzzling questions were perfectly explained. For a priest like Ibn, the oracle accepted in his firm belief was more authoritative than the orders of Pharaoh. And for him to be able to reach this position, he was certainly not just a bookworm who recited hieroglyphs and practiced magic, and he could also see the current situation of Merneptah and Pharaoh. Although the words of Pharaoh's orders to the various cities were harsh, they were clearly strong in appearance and weak in heart, and the cities were unwilling to carry them out. Destroy the records of the oracle, and never make them public. This was a kind of blasphemy in Ibn's view, and even more inconsistent with the laws of the empire. Not to mention the oracle of Allah, even the oracle of the so-called evil god Hanti, in Ibn's view, should be issued. As for the will of the gods, it might be better for the world to judge. So in his heart, he was unwilling to carry out Pharaoh's orders, and he sent a secret letter to ask his most respected supreme mage, Vord, what should he do? The 9th-level supreme mage, Vord, was old and rarely dealt with mundane affairs. His reply to Ibn was only one meaningful sentence: seek the glory of light and wait for the right time. What was the right time? A veteran of officialdom like Roderick naturally knew best. Such an important matter, of course, Ibn had to discuss it with Lord Drick. Roderick, however, was hesitant. He suggested that the oracle records should not be destroyed, but also not made public for the time being. The orders of Pharaoh should be executed on the surface, but it should be delayed in secret. The recruitment of craftsmen to rebuild the statue of Seth should be prepared first, but there was no rush to start. As far as Roderick knew, the other nearby city-states had adopted a similar attitude. They did not openly violate the pharaoh's orders to issue the oracle, but they were also secretly delaying the restoration of the statue of Seth. Everyone was waiting for someone to be the first to raise an objection. Conflict would come sooner or later, but the first to raise an objection would often be the most severely suppressed and might become the first victim. It was under such circumstances that George and Madanzo came to the Cape States. Ibn heard the news and went 150 miles out of the city to meet the two visitors from afar at the southern end of the original Kenmet defense line. On this narrow throat at the southern end of the Red Sea, there was a military fortress and a large town where caravans stopped. The local garrison general was about to hold a banquet when he suddenly heard the sudden arrival of the chief priest, Ibn. When Ibn saw George and Madanzo, he first explained the purpose of his visit. I am the current chief priest of the Anjira army and the Cape States. I admire your achievements and reputation, so I came here to welcome you. George smiled modestly. We are only returning to Iga to visit an old friend. We did not intend to disturb Lord Ibn. Madanzo did not mince words. Lord Ibn, you came all the way here to see us. Surely you are not just trying to show your hospitality and politeness? If you have something to say, why don't you just say it? Ibn bowed and said, I do not have anything to ask of you, I am only looking for an answer. You are not only the founding fathers of the Anjira army, but also the followers of Ammonius. Especially Lord George, who was once of the same birth as me, but has witnessed the true gods of the human world. I once swore to believe in the gods and protect the glory of the gods, but when the gods came to the human world, the priests who thought they were closest to Ji Ling turned a blind eye. So I want to see you, and then think about how to face the gods. George's voice quietly sounded in his soul, Lord Chief Priest, have you received Angira's oracle? Ibn also quietly replied, yes, it is this that makes my soul uneasy, so Pharaoh ordered that the records be destroyed and never made public. George said, is Pharaoh's order stupid? Ibn said, stupid, but also helpless. The name Merneptah is one with Seth's fate, he had no other choice. George said, so you can only carry out such an order? Ibn showed a pleading look, today I am welcoming Ammonius' messenger, this already shows that I do not want to carry out Pharaoh's order. You must have come here with Ammonius' guidance, I would like to know what this guidance is. George waved his hand lightly, you and I are not puppets, we should know what we want to do, and what we can do. Since you're here, please do us a favor. We want to enter the Cape States to visit Roderick, the bigger the better, it would be best if we can gather the senior generals of the Angira army and the lords of the city together. Roderick had originally planned to wait at home, but very soon, Madanzo and George, unexpectedly, came to visit. But now that the scene had happened, he could no longer pretend. After hearing the news, he had to open the mansion door and personally welcome them. From afar, he saw Ibn and the others. Roderick was a wily old fox, he quickly stepped forward and opened his arms to Madanzo and George, it's a rare sight. I have already prepared fine wine and delicacies in the mansion, today we must drink to our heart's content. All the generals and lords are here. Come come come. Let's sit down and drink together. Let's not go home until we're drunk. Madanzo chuckled and looked at Roderick, city lord, you've gained weight. Roderick was once the youngest city lord of Igut, he was 10 years older than Amon, this year he was already 56 years old. For ordinary people, this age was approaching the end of their lifespan, but Roderick was not a great aristocrat who only knew how to live like a prince, he was also a warrior of the 6th level, and his achievements in body arts were already quite good. Although he was now a little fat, he did not neglect the practice of martial arts for many years, after all, as a legion commander, it was possible for him to go to the battlefield. Although he had never become a supreme warrior, his physique was still strong. At this moment, this warrior of the 6th level, of course, did not carry a sword, and only wore his usual clothes. He welcomed everyone into the mansion and set up a banquet to celebrate the reunion of old friends. George and Madanzo did not know how many banquets they had eaten along the way, but today's meal was the most luxurious, the food on the table were all exquisite gold and silver utensils. Roderick was very enthusiastic, constantly toasting during the banquet, also recalling many things of the past, he could not help but sigh when talking about the emotional parts of the past. But this smart city lord never asked the purpose of Madanzo and George, he just wanted to reminisce about the past. When the wine was almost drunk, the generals at the banquet untied their clothes, their foreheads began to sweat. Madanzo raised his glass to Roderick and stood up. Roderick hurriedly stood up and raised his glass, saying, Lord Madanzo, I should be the one to toast you. Come, come, let me personally pour it for you. Madanzo, however, stretched out his hand to stop him, saying, City Lord, don't be in a hurry to toast me. This glass of wine was raised by me on behalf of Ammonius, since you have already raised your glass, shouldn't you first toast to Ammonius? Roderick replied, this glass of wine, let us toast to God together. Roderick did not toast alone, he called everyone present, and said, to God. As a result, all the generals raised their glasses, stood up, and loudly said, to Ammonius. Then the other lords also stood up, some said, to God, some said, to Ammonius. In any case, everyone toasted this glass of wine. After putting down the glass, Madanzo did not sit down, but directly said, City Lord Drick, this time we are here to visit, Ammonius asked me to ask you 2 questions. Roderick secretly complained, he wanted to avoid the matter, but in the end, he could not avoid it. Madanzo used this occasion to ask questions in front of everyone. As long as he opened his mouth, it would be difficult to explain afterwards. The city lord hesitated for a moment, secretly sighed, but still put down the glass, bowed and said, "May I ask what message does Ammonius have?" Speaking of which, as soon as this sentence came out, Roderick's originally uneasy heart became calm. In fact, he really wanted to know what Ammon would say to him. Only to hear Madanzo ask unhurriedly, "Ammonius has already sent down the oracle, why did the Cape States cover up the voice of God, hoodwinking people's ears, and have not announced it until now? Did the Cape States receive the oracle, and why did they not make it public? City Lord Roderick, if you were to make a sincere decision, what would you be willing to do?" God does not want to blame anyone, he just wants an answer. Before Roderick could answer, presiding priest Ibn took over the conversation, bowed with a look of fear and replied, "The Cape States did receive the oracle of Ammonius, the priests of the shrine and city Lord Drick are all aware of it. As for why it has not been announced, it is not Lord Drick's fault, because Pharaoh has issued a secret order to destroy the records of the oracle and not allow it to be made public." The supreme mage spoke the truth, and the people present were shocked. Most of them did not know about this matter, and today was the first time they heard about it. The people asked one after another, "Respected supreme mage, what kind of oracle did Ammonius send down, and why did Pharaoh not allow it to be made public? Anyway, we are all on the same side here, just say it." The words of the city officials were still polite, but the generals already wanted to slam the table and shout. Ibn looked at George with a pleading look, but George just smiled, and Madanzo said loudly, "Stupid Pharaoh, does he think that his order can stop the will of the gods? Presiding priest, Lord Drick, have you ever thought about it, if Ammonius sends down an oracle during the ceremony of the city and let all the people hear it, can you cover it up?" Ibn could not help but remind in a low voice, "Since ancient times, the oracle has only been sent down in the shrine to the priests who prayed, never in the ceremony for all the people to hear." This was the truth. When the gods of the various divine systems of the heavens' pivot continent descended the oracle, it was through the priests in the temples. Sometimes the priests prayed to the gods for instructions for a specific event, and the gods might give an oracle. Sometimes the priests would hear the voice of the gods during their daily prayers, and this was an oracle given by the gods themselves. The shrine was a place where people offered sacrifices to the gods and received the oracle, and the priests in the shrine were not only the organizers of the sacrifice, but also the spokesmen of the gods in the world. There were at least 3 advantages for the gods to do this. First, they could use the combination of theocracy and monarchical power to form a stable source of divine power. The gods could not build the shrine themselves, the shrines were built by the cities in the world. Second, they could avoid a lot of conflicts or doubts. When people were dissatisfied, they often did not directly target the gods, but resented the priests for violating the will of the gods. The third advantage was obvious, and that was the most convenient. In theory, the gods could hear the prayers and calls of all the believers in the realm of the gods, but in fact, they could not be concentrating on distinguishing countless thoughts all the time. The priests prayed to the gods on behalf of the people, and told the gods about the most important things in a specific ceremony, and this solved the problem. In theory, the gods could speak to all the people who believed in them, but many gods did not have such a huge magical power, especially some 9th-level oracles who were worshipped as gods, they did not have this ability. Moreover, the gods were not always in the world. When they were in the divine kingdom, it was difficult to communicate directly with ordinary mortals in the soul like in the world. At this time, the oracle had to be conveyed through a specific way, and the incarnation of the god in the statue was the simplest and most effective. It was the extension of the perception of the gods, and could give the oracle to the priests in the state of prayer and meditation. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.